There are some problems here. Sorry, big time.
I'm so upset. Oh my God.
The guy! All right, welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk Uygur, Ana Kasparian with you guys. And I've gone through an effort throughout the day that you all should know, and to de-rage myself. And tonight we get this wonderful mystery of whether that's worked, and we're all gonna find out together. Bill Maher has said some things that sent me into a rage earlier today. Israel is stepping up their propaganda campaign in a couple of very interesting, distinct ways that we're going to talk about in today's show that was deeply frustrating, and many other stories. So, but we're going to try to do it with aplomb and rationality, and deal with all that. And Nick Fuentes went on Piers Morgan's program. We're going to talk about that. Carlson went to Qatar, but we're going to do it all with Team Hope. Okay. So, Casper, what do we got?
Well, why don't we start with this?
We have not, if you look back over the arc of our deployment history over the last few years, we haven't had a lot of American combat power in our own neighborhood. I think that's, I suspect that's probably going to change. We'll see what we're ordered to do.
Well, as you just heard from Dan Kane, who happens to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, well, he's suggesting military combat in our own neighborhoods, which I would just venture to say is not something that most Americans would want to co-sign onto. But Cenk, what are your 2 cents?
Yeah, so I think that this story is deeply problematic. One of the most important stories. Will they be able to succeed on this program? So they are going to try to do a lockdown on politically incorrect thoughts, things that are described as anti-American, anti-Christian. Apparently that's not allowed anymore. Anti-capitalist, that's not allowed anymore. So Anna's gonna give you the full list, but they're coming for us. And by us, I don't mean just the left. I mean, really anyone who the government thinks is having an unacceptable thought. So if you thought the government shouldn't tread on you, boy, you're gonna wanna pay attention to this story.
Exactly. So look, that clip really bolsters what the heart of this segment is about, because friend of the show, Ken Klippenstein, uncovered some interesting documents from the Justice Department that indicate that they are basically planning to compile a list of Americans who the federal government deems to be extremist. Okay, so again, this is from Ken Klippenstein's reporting. He says, per the DOJ memo obtained exclusively by Klippenstein, Attorney General Pam Bondi is ordering the FBI to compile a list of groups or entities engaging in acts that may constitute domestic terrorism. Now, already we're running into a huge issue here because, as we know, the Trump administration is ready and willing to call anything and everything terrorism. We're seeing that play out in the Caribbean right now as we speak when it comes to fishing boats. And the allegation is the fishing boats contain narco terrorists, and no evidence, of course, has been provided for that. Besides which, even if we're talking about proven drug smugglers or traffickers, US policy is not to just execute them extrajudiciously. But nonetheless, the target, according to Klippenstein's reporting, is those expressing opposition to law and immigration enforcement, extreme views in favor of mass migration and open borders, adherence to radical gender ideology, as well as anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, and anti-Christianity. So let me get this straight. Simply disagreeing with someone who believes in gender ideology, not good enough. Now they need to be labeled as extremists, as terrorists, as people that need to be put on some sort of DOJ list. That's insane. That's insane. That's absolutely crazy. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, this is as un-American as it gets because it goes to the core issue of freedom of speech, and it says you shouldn't have any. If you have speech that we don't agree with, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And as always, guys, this isn't just about the right's getting to do it to the left. If the left gets in, bad guys on the left. If I don't know that anyone on the left that I know of would ever do this. But for the folks on the right, they think, oh, the left is filled with guys who can't wait to take advantage of stuff like this and tread on them, right? Okay, well, what happens when the next time someone from the left or a Democrat gets in the power and they go, well, you said radical gender ideology. I think your gender ideology is radical. Not acknowledging trans people or calling them mental disease, et cetera, is radical. So now you're in a world of trouble and we're gonna tread on you. Anti-American, well, I mean, there's a lot of ways to think about American principles. Anti-capitalism, well, okay, now if you're not in favor of what? Corporatism or crony capitalism, et cetera, we're gonna count that and we're gonna come after you if you're on the left or the right. No, this is insanity. In America, one of the pillars of our government and our constitution is the freedom of speech and really freedom of thought, that we're allowed to think whatever we want. So to me, you're radical on gender ideology on either side, I don't care, so what? Air it out. I have debates with Hassan every year. He's my nephew, Hassan Piker, and he argues for a lot more strident socialism. I argue for capitalism, but democratic capitalism. That's a great debate. Well, should we shut that debate down and arrest one of us for having the wrong opinions? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. I don't care if you consider yourself the most capitalist or the least capitalist person. You're allowed to think any of those things in America. So look, Anna, I think the biggest question of all is, how is the country going to react to this? Because if they let them do this, then we're kind of doomed. And that's not hyperbole. This is coming after core freedoms, right? So
yeah, I mean, look, you're right about that. I don't think it matters how the country reacts to it because the people of this country have been ignored on pretty much every issue they care about, with the exception of the Epstein files, which, luckily got the support of a bipartisan group of politicians who wouldn't let up on that issue. But if it weren't for them, if we didn't have any allies in Congress, the public is unorganized. And what I mean by that is when you're unorganized, you're ineffective in pushing for the kind of change that we need in this country, including preventive measures to ensure that you don't have the FBI, and it would be the FBI that would put this list together. You don't have the FBI putting a list of people they don't like together to refer to them as domestic terrorists. But okay, so how would the FBI locate individuals with these beliefs? Like, how do they, first of all, determine that someone falls under their categories of terrorism? And how do they identify and find those people? What indicators are they looking for? Well, according to Klippenstein, Attorney General Pam Bondi wants the FBI to more publicly promote its tip line, which, okay, so you're hoping that other Americans can, I guess, tell on each other, rat on each other as potential terrorists, potential extremists. And she also wants to create a cash reward system for information that could get the leaders of these purported domestic terrorist organizations arrested. Now, it does go a little bit deeper because the memo later instructs the FBI to establish cooperators to provide information and eventually testify against other members of the group. And the FBI won't just focus on new cases. In fact, the memo also directs the FBI and FBI Joint Terrorism Task Forces to retroactively investigate incidents going back 5 years, authorizing JTTFs in particular to use everything at their based on the American people. Based on, by the way, like, define what terrorist means for the Trump administration. I mean, it's very vague, and I think it's intentionally vague.
Yeah, and of course it'll be selectively enforced. So when the Trump people are in charge, the first people they're going to come after is anyone voicing criticism of Israel. Of course, that's always the number one priority. And then they could move on to people criticizing Trump. I can't believe something comes in at above criticizing Trump as things that this administration is concerned about. But yeah, that'll come in second. So they'll try to declare Jimmy Kimmel a domestic terrorist who's anti something or other, or whatever that they ludicrous lunatic thing that they do. But Anna, overall, I hope to God that I'm not overly optimistic here, but I don't think this one's gonna stick. I think that, again, they're gonna lose the middle on this in a big, big way. When they go to the independent podcasters that sway a lot of those younger voters, I don't see those guys going, oh yeah, let's just do a new reign of terror against freedom of speech. That's what we signed up for. And we're all now noticing all the grotesque hypocrisies of the government, right? So on the one hand, Trump says, oh, we're going to get going after Venezuela because of drugs. And then he lets go one of the biggest drug dealers in human history. The other day, the former president of Honduras pardons him. It's insanity. 45-year sentence. On this one, you're like Israel killing 20,000 children, not terrorism. Sheldon Adelson flying out Jonathan Pollard, one of the biggest traitors in American history, on his luxury private jet, not betraying America. But if you speak out against Trump or Netanyahu, all of a sudden you'll be a domestic terrorist who's a traitor and speaking out against America. So this is as treading on you as it gets. If you had one of those flags, this is time to bring it out.
All right, let's get to our next story. I was on Bill Maher's show and deeply regret it. Let's get into it.
If you're listening to a podcast,
The truth never makes me uncomfortable. It only exhilarates me.
I mean,
no matter where it's, on whatever side it is.
Yeah.
And
you want to talk about a little bit of shooting Gaza then? You want to get exhilarated, right? I can exhilarate you.
I know you're going to say genocide, and I'm going to say, well, you don't know what the word means. And it's like, if you don't even know what the words mean.
I'm Armenian. I know what the word means.
I was on Club Random with Bill Maher just recently, and the whole video has been released for those who want to watch it. But for the purposes of saving time on this show, we're going to talk about some of the highlights. But before we get to that, Cenk, your 2 cents.
Yeah, so look, I think Bill is anti-intellectual. I think he's a racist and a bigot. And I'm gonna try to show that to you guys today. I'm also happy to debate him anytime, but I don't think he'll do that. And so he's a guy who it is a bigger problem because look, there's a lot of racists and bigots in the country, but he's celebrated. Like HBO gives him millions of dollars and the elite love Bill Maher. And he's paradoxical too, because there's plenty of things that I agree with him on. But when it gets to the issue of Israel or Muslims, he's really as deranged as anyone in American media.
So we'll come back to some of his claims, including the idea that Israel is not an expansionist project and all of that in just a minute. But before we do, there was this gotcha moment, which I want to clarify the way I answered it. So it had to do with where in the Middle East I would like to live given the dress I'm wearing. So I'll let the video play out and then I'll give you more details.
If you had to live in the Middle East, so tomorrow, Anna, you got to go live in the Middle East, where would you live? Where do you think you'd be comfortable in that dress?
I'm sure it would not be comfortable in this dress in any of the various Middle Eastern countries that have been destabilized by
you're not you're not really blaming it on whitey.
Listen.
Are you? You're blaming Islam on whitey?
I'm not blaming Islam on whitey.
But what you're saying is we destabilized, that's why you can't wear that dress?
Did we not destabilize?
Wait a second.
We were funding terrorist organizations in Syria during the Syrian civil war. Starting under the Obama administration.
That's why
did that not destabilize Syria?
No, what's destabilized?
There's a literal Al Qaeda terrorist.
We're talking about your dress. Why?
It looks good. I know it looks good.
You're saying you can't wear that dress in Syria because of whitey destabilizing?
I didn't say that.
Okay, that's what it said. Okay, great.
But the United States did destabilize various Middle Eastern countries. Are you going to deny that?
I probably wouldn't feel comfortable wearing that dress in Syria today, considering the fact that a former Al-Qaeda terrorist who we armed covertly is now the leader of Syria. Correct. Am I blaming that on whitey? Like, why make this racial? This isn't about race at all, at all. US foreign policy does not equate whitey, but funding and arming an offshoot of Al-Qaeda in Syria, was meant to destabilize that country, as we now see. as Christians, Alawites, and other minority groups in that country who, even under the butcher, Bashar al-Assad, were pretty safe, are now being targeted and killed by members of Ahmed al-Shara's, honestly, terrorist group. It's just the truth. I mean, he says that he's trying to rein it in, but it's still happening. It's just the truth. But look, I didn't want to take the bait because it's so obvious that he wants me to say, like, well, obviously I would never want to live in a Muslim majority country. They're all dangerous barbarians. They're all animals. I'd want to live in Israel. But the fact of the matter is, I would rather die before I step foot in Israel. And the reason why is because of the apartheid state. It's because of the fact that they put Cenk's name on a missile that they then used to bomb children in Gaza, essentially sending a message. It might also have to do with the fact that IDF soldiers literally send me images of their weapons in an effort to scare me into silence. So no, I wouldn't step foot in Israel. I would actually feel a lot less safe in Israel as opposed to, I don't know, Beirut, Lebanon, Istanbul, Turkey. Okay, there are plenty of places in the Middle East where I would be safe. Even when it comes to Iran, I mean, this country is so unbelievably ignorant about the reality in Iran. There's a massive Armenian diaspora living in Iran right now. They dress just like I do. They go to church. There are churches in Iran. But, how am I going to bring that up when literally every 2 seconds I'm getting interrupted and it gets back to, where would you want to live with a dress like that? Who cares what I want or where I want to live? Let's actually have a discussion about the substance of the foreign policy here. But anyway, people saw that as an own. Maybe you guys agree. That's fine if you agree, but it is what it is.
No, look, anyone who looks at that and goes, Bill Maher was right, honestly is not being very thoughtful. Is not thinking the issue through. Let's put it that way. So look, let's break it down real quick. Number one, he says, "Oh, would you want to live in a Muslim country?" Well, first of all, that's overtly bigoted. If I said, "Would you want to live among Jews?" Everybody would say, "That's outrageous, Cenk. What are you saying?" But Bill Maher says it, and HBO says, "Oh, here's millions more. Please say more racist and bigoted things against Muslims and Arabs." Now, why do I say racist and Arabs? Because Bill's issue really isn't with Muslims. He used that as a cover story. Would you want to live in a Muslim country? Do you know what the top 5 Muslim countries are? They're Indonesia, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and Nigeria. None of them are Arab. And could you wear a dress like that in Nigeria or India or Indonesia? Of course you could, right? Let alone many other Muslim countries that are in the Middle East or near the Middle East. But in Bill Maher's racist and bigoted mind, he thinks, oh, Muslims, they're all hateful and terrorist and barbaric and savages. So they'd probably what, kill you for wearing a dress or something, right? So what he does is he takes the most extreme in that one religion and he makes it seem like all 1.6 billion Muslims believe that. The reality is, of course, 1.6 billion Muslims are humans. I know that's shocking to a moron like Bill Maher, who thinks in like super simplistic, ignorant ways. So you know what they care about, Bill? Like their grandma, they care about their grandchildren. They care about giving them milk and cookies. They care about normal things. Hey, what kind of car or house am I going to live in? I know in your Israel-addled mind, you think, oh, they're just thinking about how do I get the Jews and people in dresses, right? So if you, again, anything that he says about Muslims, take out Muslim and put in Jewish, and you would be banned from every platform in the country. You would be derided. You would get the Nick Fuentes treatment. Anyone who talked to you would be trying to be driven out from media. So could you live in, for example, Istanbul? Of course you could. Istanbul is a beautiful city, perfectly modern. The whole world goes to it. It's one of the largest cities in the world, and certainly attracts tourism in enormous ways, and everybody feels perfectly comfortable there in that way. But do I have to go city by city and justify all of this? Meanwhile, his juxtaposition is, oh, but everybody feels safe in Israel, and hence Israel's a lovely and modern.
No,
and
not everybody.
Country.
Not everybody.
That's the point.
Ask the Armenians, ask the Armenian Christians living in Jerusalem right now, what kind of pleasant treatment they get from the Israelis. Seriously. Seriously, talk to anyone who isn't an Israeli living in Israel, anyone who isn't an Israeli Jew living in Israel. Have a conversation with them. They love to bring up the 20%, Arab Israeli citizen number. Okay, let's take a look at how they're treated, like second-class citizens, even in the context of mainland Israel, right? Not in the West Bank, not in Jerusalem, not in Gaza. They're in Israel. They're Israeli citizens, but they don't have the exact same rights as Israelis do.
Yeah.
So look, I get it. I get that in his mind, he is so fully like dehumanized Muslims as like these savages that he would be shocked that I would, not want to live in Israel. If I had to choose, if there's a gun to my head and I have to flee to the Middle East, obviously you're gonna want to go to Israel. No, I wouldn't want to go to Israel. The idea that I would be treated well in Israel is laughable to me. What, just so I can wear a short skirt and feel good about myself? That's the epitome of safety. It's just such a dumb question. And the thing that drives me nuts is that people like really looked at that and thought, wow, he really got her. Yeah. Did he though?
No, but like, Anna, the only people who think that he got you are the people who also hate Muslims and have these stereotypically deeply, bigoted views about Muslims. So, but look, I want to address the second half of it. But living in Israel is great, is it? No, that comes from his privileged position as a Jewish American who kisses Israel's ass 24/7. So yeah, if you're one of those people, then yeah, Israel's gonna treat you like royalty. But if you're a Muslim American journalist like me, the chance that Israel will murder me if I go there is significant. They killed Shireen Abu Akleh, who was a Palestinian American journalist. They assassinated her, and our government didn't even ask for any recourse. In fact, our government stopped an FBI probe of the Israelis murdering an American citizen just because she's Muslim, and our government says we're just as racist as Bill Maher. And in the last 5 years, the Israelis have murdered 9 American citizens. 8 of them were Muslim Americans, so our government did nothing. And so, no, I would never go to Israel. And not only that, Israel's the biggest terrorist organization in the world right now. Hamas's civilian kill ratio is abominable, terrible. It's at 67%, meaning 2/3 of the people that they killed on October 7th were civilians. That's why they're terrorists. IDF's civilian kill ratio is 83%, significantly worse than Hamas. And of course, they've killed about 60 to 70 times the number of people Hamas did. So as a raw number, they're much bigger terrorists. As a civilian kill ratio showing intent, Israel is much bigger terrorist. So no, you're not safe at all in Israel unless you're an Israeli or you're an American that kisses their ass. But they even spit on Christians when you go to Jerusalem. Is it they as in all Israelis? No, we're not bigots like Bill Maher. We don't think in general. Of course, there's tons of dissent in Israel. They're human beings like everybody else. But no, you will be treated like dirt if you go to Israel and you're Muslim. And if you don't agree with the fascist government of Israel, they will turn on you in vicious ways. They just had a 16-year-old American kid in one of the Israeli gulags. They did us a big favor by releasing him on Thanksgiving. And the kid comes out decimated, right? He's lost 30% of his weight, etc. No, they're running a torture factory, a terrorism factory there. No, Bill, no one feels safe with Israel. No one. All they ever do is attack their neighbors. And that's why you hate Muslims so much, because your issue isn't with Indonesia or Nigeria. Your issue is with Israel's Arab neighbors. You would like to create an excuse for Israel to attack those neighbors, which is what they have done repeatedly. Kill those occupants, ethnically cleanse them, and take that land, which Israel has done repeatedly in 1948, in 1967, and after October 7th. Every time they take land while pretending to do self-defense. But so these are actual facts, but Bill Maher never ever talks about facts. He just does Israeli propaganda and Muslim hatred and bigotry and thinks it's sophisticated. When in reality, when you're unbiased and objective, you look at it, you think, what a sad little moron that HBO has decided to put out here to do propaganda for another country.
We got to take a break, but when we come back, maybe we'll play a few more clips from the conversation, but we'll include a link in the description box so you can watch the full conversation for yourselves. For now, though, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Back on TYT. Guys, apparently they have collector's items, snapbacks for the Dragon Squad on shoptyt.com this week. So make sure you're checking that out. There's only 70 of them. Once they sell out, they're gone. We do a pretty good job of keeping our word on that, right? When we do limited editions, they really are limited editions. You might never see them again. So shoptyt.com to grab that. They look good. All right, let's go to our members on tyt.com. Tap, tap, tap as this mic on says, here's Cenk doing more work post-surgery than Congress has done in 10 years. That's a low bar, brother, but thank you. In fact, we're gonna talk about Congress a little bit later in the program and how they're fleeing so they don't have to do any more work. Michael Napin says, I'm giving Cenk the first break to derage. Well, let's see how it goes. Like I said, it's a fun little mystery. Guam will capsize Dragon says, fighting freedom over here so we don't have to fight it over there. Yeah, I know, right? Fighting our freedoms here and ending them before our enemies do. That's apparently the Trump plan, as we told you in the first story. Theater Goddess says, I fully believe that Cenk managed to calm himself down. It's whether he's able to keep calm when he hears everything again or not. My thought is probably not. Well, look, guys, one of the reasons that I get animated these days is because of the enormous double standard that's so hard to live with, which is people's in reaction to the Bill Maher story. I wrote something on social media, and you just look at the comment section. You dirty Muslim, all you stupid Muslims should be kicked out of the country. Muslim this and Muslim that, and just over the top bigotry, and no one cares at all, Perfect. And Bill Maher does it on HBO, and no one cares, right? So then you say something about Israel and they're like, Trump, and they scream from the rooftops about how their feelings are hurt. And so that kind of disparity is enraging. Where basically they're saying people who support Israel matter. They're important people, and you need to be super respectful of even the tiniest little sensitivity that they have. But your life is totally irrelevant. Your family's life is irrelevant. So we'll say all sorts of terrible, racist, bigoted things against you, and you're not allowed to complain. If you do complain, come on, Cenk, come on. You're just biased or something. I don't know, whatever. So it's hard to not get enraged about that. But that's the world we live in, and the Israelis have enormous power inside America, and Muslims have almost none. So I'm gonna have to live with that disparity and do the best I can. And by the way, forget me. I'm at least atheist, so I don't practice, right? But good, devout Muslims in this country have to deal with, if you don't know, the discrimination against them is overwhelming. It is 10,000 times more than discrimination against almost any other group. I'm sorry, but it's true. Because if you say something, even if against black people or whatever, or Latinos, people are gonna get outraged. Against LGBTQ folks, there's gonna be a debate and a national conversation. You say terrible things about Muslims, everybody's like, attaboy, way to go, yes. There's no ramifications at all. So here we are. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Ana with you guys. Also, Argot8059, thank you for hitting that big, beautiful join button below the video on YouTube. You guys know you can do tyt.com/join at any time, and you save a couple of months if you do the annual membership, right? tyt.com/join. I am going to read one comment here because this lightens the mood. Hakuna Matata said, Bill Maher was right about one thing, Ana looked great in that dress. So we appreciate you. And you know what? I'll read a second fun one. Ashone76 in the YouTube member section said, love is the way, hate is not the answer. So I agree with that completely. And then real quick, let me tell you about one of our sponsors, Noble Mobile. They're great. Guys, if you pay more than $50 for your wireless service, why? It's same phone, same number, same service. I did it, took me 5 minutes. It's saving me a ton of money, and they give you cash back if you don't use all your data. And I got over $10 back. So I paid less than $40 a month for my phone now, and nothing changed. So tyt.com/switch, tyt.com/switch. All right, Anna, what's next?
All right, we'll play just a couple more videos from the Bill Maher interview. So during the Bill Maher interview, where we were discussing, or I should say debating Israel, the topic of the Greater Israel Project came up. And Bill Maher's thoughts on that were fascinating. I don't want to give too much away. Let's take a quick look.
Israel is fighting to survive, and also, they are the front line in the Western world.
I totally disagree with you on this entirely.
Well,
I think much of the problems we have in the Middle East is due to the enabling of this look, it's an expansionist policy. If Israel wasn't trying to continue expanding in the Middle East,
so
I don't think they would be dealing with the enmity, like the enemies that they're dealing with.
They've never been asked. They've never been trying to expand.
They're trying to annex the West Bank right now, and Lebanon, southern Lebanon, and Syria, which they've succeeded in.
These are all places that they were attacked from. When they became a country in 1947, they said, "Okay, we will accept half a loaf." They had as much right to that land as anybody. There was a continual presence there since 1000 BC, when King David had a kingdom.
I don't care about that at all.
Okay, but it's relevant. It's relevant to people. It's relevant.
You can't wipe out innocent people because you used to live there like centuries ago.
You're calling them colonizers. They're not colonizers.
They're expanding and they're annexing land. That's what colonizers do.
He just believes that the Israelis are entitled to the land. So on one hand, he's denying the expansionist policy, which is obviously playing out clearly in front of all of us. And then he says, well, yeah, I mean, they're entitled to that land. So it was promised to them 3,000 years ago. Yeah. They used to live there. Anyway, go ahead.
And I thought Bill was an atheist. But all of a sudden, he's like, what do you mean? The Jews are owed that land. God promised to them. What? What happened to atheists? No, his atheism is all about crapping on Muslims. That's his cover story. I'm an atheist, so I can say vicious, terrible things about Muslims and occasionally Christians, but almost never about Judaism or his beloved Israel. And in his perverted, insane, deranged mind, he's like, yeah, well, in 1948, Jews owned 6% of the land there. They took 48%, and I guess they got it through rainbows and unicorns. The reality is they slaughtered the Palestinians and dragged them through town so they would know that all these, you're going to be next. That's why 750,000 Palestinians ran for their lives because of the terrorism of Israel. That's how they took the half a loaf. Then in 1967, Israel, attacked all of their neighbors and called it preemptive attack, self-defense. And look at that, they took the Golan Heights, Sinai Peninsula, Gaza, and West Bank. But he says, oh, that's just a coincidence that we happen to constantly attack, and take all that land. And October 7th, we were attacked. That's why we murdered 80,000 people and took half of Gaza. So Bill, are you gonna give half of Gaza back? No, Israel's never going to give half of Gaza back. They've kept the West Bank and Gaza for 58 years as occupied, basically concentration camps.
I mean, he knows. The point is, he knows and he doesn't care. He thinks they're entitled to it. I mean, he made that clear. Look, I think the biggest takeaway and part of the reason why I'm pretty devastated today is just the realization that everyone who argues in favor of Israel and tries to hide the ball and pretend like they don't know what Israel's doing. They do know. They actually fully know. They're fully aware. They know about the land theft. They know about the annexations. They know about the mass slaughter. They just don't care. They think it's justified. And that really I don't know, it just kills me inside to know that we have a sizable portion of this country that thinks that's totally okay, including power players in the media, the elite in pretty much every single one of our institutions. I just didn't think that this many people were capable of dehumanizing literal children. Israel killed a 3-year-old over the weekend. They used a drone strike to kill a 3-year-old at a refugee camp in Gaza.
Yeah, they do it all the time. American doctors come back, sniper shots, head to the head and chest. Israeli snipers are murdering children under the age of 5. Hind Rajab, the Israelis are told she has survived. It's a 6-year-old. We're sending an ambulance to get her. They go, oh yeah, go ahead. They murder everyone in the ambulance, and then they murder the 6-year-old. They have an 83% civilian kill ratio, the worst of any terrorist group. So IDF is a gigantic terrorist organization, and it's empirical, it's factual, and it's inarguable. But they say no, if you hated Muslims as much as we do, you would see that an 83% civilian kill ratio is totally fine. You would see that murdering 6-year-olds is totally fine, and the moral thing to do that a special ally would do in favor of Western civilization. This is all propaganda so that people like Bill Maher can get you to hate Muslims so that Israel can continue to attack them and take their land. So those things are now obvious to a lot of people. And that's why the Bill Mahers of the world and the Barry Weisses, etc., are in a rage. They're like, no, shut the stupid Muslims up, shut the stupid Americans up, and get them to bow their head to Israel again. Well, sorry, Bill, we're not going to. And by the way, I want to be super clear. I would never have a position as immoral as Bill Maher. Do I think the Palestinians should attack Israel? Absolutely not. Should they take any of Israel's land in Israel proper, pre-1967 borders? Absolutely not, okay? Even though the Palestinians have a right to self-defense after being occupied for 58 years, brutal occupation of the Israelis. They're ruthless Israelis, right? But even so, I would say, no, don't attack them, don't take their land, don't kill them, and don't harm their civilians. Whereas Bill Maher says, civilians, who cares? Murder as many people as you like, we'll call it a war. When you do it, we'll call it terrorism, even though you're actually defending yourself, okay? Oh, I know, Bill, it's Muslims, I know. Go ahead and lose your mind. And he'll just go spin into his rage, all Muslims are terrorists. But when Israel kills far more people, and far more civilians on purpose, Bill Maher goes, who cares? They're stupid Arabs and Muslims, and we want their land anyway. So, and Bill, can you admit that it's for the land? Are you pretending that they accidentally took all that land and never gave it back? Other than Sinai for a peace treaty? By the way, we have a peace treaty model. It's peace for land. And it's land that Israelis stole anyway, so it costs Israel nothing, but he doesn't want peace. The Israelis, under no circumstances do they want peace. They want more war that America pays for with good propaganda like from Bill Maher and others to brainwash the American people into supporting genocide after genocide so that we all serve their beloved Israel.
All right, let's move on to some other news today because the New York Times published a pretty massive story over the weekend in this investigation into Ukraine and allegations of corruption. So, an investigation in the New York Times found that the Ukrainian government has systematically crippled oversight agencies that are meant to hinder and stop corruption. Cenk, your 2 cents.
Yeah, so we have some obligation to the Ukrainians because we had them take out their nukes, etc. But do we also have an obligation to make sure that our money is not wasted or going to corruption? Of course. So let's find out the facts here and then see what conclusions flow from it.
So as the Times explains in their reporting, in Ukraine, state-owned companies run the power distribution, the weapons purchases, and even the nuclear energy industries. Now, all 3 sectors and the companies within them have a long-standing history of corruption. But the country of Ukraine wanted to do something about that, especially in regard to various forms of foreign aid that go into the country. The various nation states that are allied with Ukraine wanted to make sure that the money doesn't end up in the wrong hands. And so in an effort to mitigate corruption, nations that are sending aid to Ukraine have absolutely insisted that supervisory boards be put in place as a layer of oversight, okay? In theory, these outside experts from other countries would keep an eye on the company's operations and make sure that nothing shady is going on. But the New York Times investigation found that Volodymyr Zelensky and his administration in particular have actually sabotaged those oversight boards by doing multiple things, including appointing loyalists, intentionally leaving seats in the boards empty, and even preventing anti-corruption boards from being able to form altogether. And so obviously that is going to open the door to corruption. So let's start off with one, company, state-owned company that was highlighted in the piece, and that's Ukraine's state-owned electricity company known as Energodom. Okay, so Energodom is a prime example that's highlighted in the piece. And Zelensky apparently deliberately obstructed a supervisory board that would keep an eye on this state-owned entity. The Times claims that Zelensky's administration delayed the formation of the board, and when it finally came together, the government left a seat empty, impeding the board's ability to act when they're able to identify corruption. So anti-corruption authorities have accused members of Zelensky's inner circle of siphoning off and laundering $100 million from the state-owned nuclear energy program, Energodom. So how did they do it? Well, contractors on projects for this company had to pay kickbacks of up to 15%, according to investigators. So you have Marina Zerukova, who is the first head of the agency designed to monitor inflated defense contracts. But at first, there was really no supervisory board at all to protect her. Even as she told the New York Times, she was pressured by Zelensky's government to sign off on all sorts of sketchy contracts. So eventually, a supervisory board was implemented, but the Ukrainian government, according to her, hijacked it and ousted her. She told the Times, quote, "Supervisory boards are just window dressing. They're not real." Kind of going along with this year's theme of everything seems pretty fake. But I'm curious what you think, Jane.
Yeah, look, so I know that there's corruption in other countries. I'm not, so shocked by it. And so, for example, when they say, "Oh, there's this customary 15%." That they take off the top for corruption. Yeah, that sounds super familiar in many stories I've read about many different countries. And so we came from Turkey originally. Look, this was all the way in the 1970s. And so things were presumably worse back then, although this corruption is a beast that just keeps reemerging in every country. But yeah, my dad, part of the reason that we came to America was because so tired of the corruption, and everybody takes 15% off the top of when you're dealing with the government. Now, having said that, if I'm sending money over, which we are, to Ukraine to the tune of billions of dollars, do I want someone tracking it? Yeah, of course. It's not negotiable, right? And I don't even know why that's so hard. So there's a supervisory board, and every once in a while, if they have a significant concern, I'm not saying be like super nitpicky, right? But if they've got a real concern, no, we stop the money until you tell us where that one went. Where's the question?
Yeah. Well, I'll leave you with this. So again, Ukraine does have that long running history with corruption, but according to Norway's special envoy to Ukraine, it was still worth sending Ukraine money anyway. So Christian Sees, who is the special envoy to Ukraine from Norway, says, "We do care about good governance, but we have to accept that risk because it's war, because it's in our own interest to help Ukraine financially, because Ukraine is defending Europe from Russian attacks." My take is a little different from that. I mean, I think that the American taxpayer is getting screwed left and right as our public services are being cut by our government. I really think it's important for us to not only just justify foreign aid, but more importantly, ensure that the foreign aid is ending up exactly where we intend for it to go. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, last thought here is, look, guys, if it's around the edges, I get what that brother from Europe is saying, but also, hey, they're defending you. You probably should put in a lot more than we are if we're keeping it real, okay? I know people don't like to hear that, but that's a stone cold reality. But okay, but even with the money that we're putting in now, I saw this happen when we were covering Iraq and Afghanistan. The billions of dollars that were just flat out stolen with no accountability is maddening. Let alone, by the way, the $400 billion that the Pentagon every year says they can't account for right here in America. No, we have to have much stricter financial accountability, which is if you're taking our money to the tune of hundreds of millions and even up to hundreds of billions of dollars. No, yeah, we have to know where it's going. And it's not acceptable to say, oh, well, there's some corruption and so we stole a bunch of it. Well, then okay, however much you stole, you're certainly not getting in the future. That's the bare minimum. And that's not unfair to ask of a nation that's helping you in the middle of a war.
When we come back from the break, we'll talk a little bit about some of the viral videos featuring Border Patrol or ICE agents pretty violently detaining American citizens, by the way, and what happened in the aftermath of those stories. That and more coming up. Don't miss it.
Back, everybody. TYT.com members. Wang Jun says it's like they're trying to start the civil war they've been fear-mongering about for all these years, referring to the Justice Department memo going after left-wing organizations, etc. Virginia and South Carolina says Anna's really looking fire, you all. Okay, God bless. Tap, tap, tap. Is this mic on? Says, Cenk, I love Team Hope. It reminds me how I'm sick and tired of our politics. We've been forced for far too long to vote in elections with candidates who run on, this is what you should be afraid of, and this is who's to blame for your hard times. We haven't had anyone since Obama in 2008 to run on a campaign of hope. Now, he didn't really follow through on his promises, but at least the message was aspirational. Mark my words, when we finally have a candidate run on hope and hopeful messaging, they'll win in a landslide. And if they actually follow through on that messaging, they'll be considered amongst the greatest politicians in American history. Well, look, I couldn't agree more with you. And that's part of why we do Operation Hope and all the things that we do. But our politicians are owned by the donor class, nearly 100%. That's why they don't do things like that. It's easier to get you to hate one another and get you to fight. And that way you're distracted and you don't notice that they're helping their donors rob this place blind. Standing up to the donors, incredibly difficult. That's the most difficult thing you could do in politics. And that's why most of our politicians are cowards who run from that fight and almost never do actually stand up. That's why we're so excited. Oh my God, we got like 3 of them. Kana, Massey, and unbelievably Marjorie Taylor Greene that did the Epstein files, and it worked. Just 3 of them. That's all we needed. And I don't know where the rest of the progressives were. I can't get past that. Where the hell are you if you're not fighting to get the Epstein files released? Or fighting like tooth and nail to defund Israel? Where are you? What are you doing? Anyways, all right. Feckless Fiduciary says, Cenk must be feeling the love from his post-surgery opiates. The concept of deraging is entirely out of character, LOL, but very consistent with the euphoria of painkillers. No. Believe me, I was in a rage earlier today and I'm not taking the opiates. I'm scared to death of that because of all the stories we've covered. No, this is just good old ibuprofen and my own personality. All right. Old Dirty Pastor says, Bill Maher was absolutely taking immature, cheap shots at Anna, and she took it with grace and came out like a bona fide champ. Bill Maher is the thinnest skinned snowflake in media. Such a surreal experience to watch TYT's ace in the hole, Ana Kasparian, go into Bill Maher's man cave and just level his ass. By the way, that wasn't the whole interview. I mean, look, Bill, if he wasn't deranged on Israel, could be an interesting person. But he's so biased and so hateful on that topic, it swallows up all other conversations. Rob Street Chatsworth says, this will date me, but I'm waiting to hear Anna channel the old SNL line, Bill, you ignorant slut. I do think of that line from time to time, but I get tempted to use it. I'm like, no, people won't understand. Don't do it. Eclectic Miscellaneous says, Anna was on fire. Bill Maher's a bigot who's either lying or woefully uninformed about Israel's expansionism and colonizing. My guess is a little bit of both. A lot of you thought that he's lying. I don't think Bill Maher's lying. I think that he genuinely believes that the Muslims should be murdered and their land should be taken and that it's genuinely self-defense and you should never give that land back. And that's somehow the moral thing to do, and that America owes Israel an infinite amount of money and an infinite number of genocides. I think he genuinely believes that because he's deeply biased and direct. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Ana with you guys. Also, Michael Duffin and No More 6863. Thank you guys. We literally can't do the show without you guys. So everyone who joins, you make a huge difference, especially as we are besieged in other parts of media and in every way. So thank you for hitting that join button. It's a good Christmas present to us. You could also either join or donate through tyt.com/join. All right, Casper.
Well, let's check in on our masked ICE and Border Patrol agents and what they've been up to.
When you have this clumsy, kind of somewhat insane, over the top deportations, people are looking at this and going, it's unserious. It's unserious. It's childish. It's cruel. I think one of the problems with whatever the MAGA movement has evolved into is it's duped their hardcore followers so much that the only thing left now is performative cruelty.
Well, Tim Dillon must be talking about the spate of viral videos featuring masked ICE or Border Patrol agents violently detaining American citizens. In fact, there are two that I want to highlight for the purposes of this story in just a minute. But before I do, Cenk, your 2 cents.
Yeah, I'm actually slightly encouraged, and I'll tell you why. Because I knew that Trump was going to try something over the top on mass deportations. That's not a big surprise. The question was, how are people going to react? And so what we're getting from a lot of the independent podcasters now is, no, we don't like it, and we want you to stop doing this. And I think that it's going to have a huge impact. I think it's already having a huge impact. So I want to talk about that too.
Well, even if the podcasters remained quiet about this, fact of the matter is, when you provide tens of billions of dollars in additional funding for a government agency, and you militarize it and you allow them to behave and carry out their duties without identifying themselves while wearing masks, well, you're going to see abuses of power that impact every single one of us, right? And it's not just undocumented people who they're looking to deport that are being harassed. In fact, the next 2 stories I'm about to highlight have to do with American citizens and the way they were treated by these federal agents. So let's start off with Key Largo, Florida, where an American citizen wearing hospital scrubs was treated this way, treated with state-sponsored violence. Take a look at this. Multiple Border Patrol agents in this case. You see multiple Border Patrol agents, and you can't see the woman yet, but you're about to. This took place on December 3rd. Now you see the woman in the scrubs who's like struggling. She's telling them that she's a US citizen over and over again. So how many agents are there right there? 4. Do you see 4 agents manhandling one woman wearing scrubs? She's screaming, "I'm a US citizen, I'm a US citizen." And I'll tell you all the details about who she is and what happened in just a moment. But I think the most important thing to keep in mind, is that they eventually released her with no charges because she did nothing wrong. So look, I will say this though. She is kind of dangerous. So it turns out this woman is a behavioral therapist who was on her way to work when these masked Border Patrol agents decided to drag her out of her vehicle at 9:15 a.m. And she is a big girl too, right? Very, very intimidating. So big that it took several masked agents to detain her. So if you want to know how big, she is just shy of 5 feet tall and weighs 85 pounds. She said. So she spoke to the Miami Herald. The feds claim that they had to detain her because she wasn't complying, but she fully denies that. In fact, a spokesperson for Customs and Border Patrol told the Miami Herald that the woman had refused to roll down her window initially. Not true. You could actually see it in the video. And after she did, refused to hand over her driver's license. In response to those allegations, the woman, who is unidentified for her safety and protection, says, to clarify, I did roll down my window the moment they pulled me over, and any claim saying that I refused to do so is completely false. In the video of the incident, you can clearly see my windows roll down as they opened my door, which further proves that I complied from the start. Before I could even reach for my driver's license, the individuals surrounding my vehicle threatened to break my window, creating fear and pressure instead of allowing me a moment to comply. Their tone and actions made it extremely difficult to remain calm or feel safe. The Miami Herald also confirmed, by the way, that the woman did in fact was pulled over by these agents, and that she did roll down her window. She says that she had been stopped twice before by, immigration agents for immigration inspections in the area without any problem, right? 2 times prior. But federal agents have ratcheted up immigration traffic stops in the Key Largo area over the past few weeks and have gotten more aggressive. So she was detained in an unmarked Ford SUV as agents looked through her belongings, including her purse, without a warrant, which she says she did not consent to. They eventually found her license, verified that she's a US citizen as she claimed, and they released her. But she did tell the Miami Herald, quote, "They dragged me out of my vehicle aggressively, snatched my phone from my hand, and handcuffed me." And by the way, I should note that legal experts say that the search of her purse and her vehicle without a warrant, is questionable when it comes to its legality. So Magdalena Kupris, who is an immigration lawyer in South Florida, told the Miami Herald, quote, "If you're within 100 miles of a border, which in theory, in the Keys you are, they do have a right to ask you for citizenship documents or for legal status, but they still don't have the right to go into your car, into your purse. That's an unreasonable search and seizure." And that's just one of the stories I wanted to highlight. Before we get to the next one, Cenk, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so can we stand our ground or can't we? Because Democrats are against this, independents are against this. I'm saying according to the polling, but some on the right still support this for sure. And so, but those are the same guys who said we could stand our ground and the government shouldn't tread on us. And that if we're American citizens, we've got all these rights, right? But here they are. And if you didn't see that earlier story, there have been people who are pretending to be ICE agents in mass with no badges that are putting women just like her into vans and raping them. So is she supposed to just go quietly into that good night? So I don't know. The right wing has to tell us, when are we allowed to stand our ground? And how do we know if it's the government or not? So if they had badges, then okay, cooperate with authorities, etc. I don't know why in the world that they're doing this, but here we don't even know that they are the government or that they are the authorities. This doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, and there have been more and more stories. I mean, there hasn't been a widespread study on this. I really wish that there would be a more comprehensive report, but there have been more cases in which, women have been snatched from the streets by masked individuals pretending to be Border Patrol or ICE agents, and then they're sexually assaulted, which is why it's important for all law enforcement, regardless of whether they're local law enforcement or federal law enforcement, to show their identity, so to identify them as actual, literal federal agents. But this wasn't the only person who was roughed up by Border Patrol agents recently, or at least immigration officials. The second case took place in Louisiana, where Border Patrol agents were seen chasing a 23-year-old woman by the name of Jaslyn Guzman to her home. So take a quick look at the video and then I'll explain what happened. Oh, we can't use that video. I apologize. It might have a copyright issue. Okay, so she was apparently walking home from a corner store in New Orleans, in a suburb of New Orleans, when she could sense that there was a silver unmarked SUV beginning to follow her. There were 2 masked agents inside who eventually exited the car and approached her. She panicked and started to run. So let's take a quick look at the video.
Leave me alone! No, you're the one that you. We weren't even looking for you. So get the over here. Hey, so what are you looking for? This is a public area. Okay, what the you want? I want to speak to you. Well, I don't want to talk to you either. You're the Hispanic people against Hispanic, bro.
So the gentleman you see coming out of the property was her stepfather, who basically told them, like, scram, get out of here, because obviously the federal agents don't have a warrant to be able to go onto the property and chase her. She is an American citizen. Again, Guzman said an agent responded by saying, okay, that's fine, come here, after she said, I'm an American citizen. She told NBC News that as soon as a second SUV pulled up, she continued running as two masked agents chased after her. At that point, she entered her home and they stopped running at the property line. And that's when her stepfather came out and told a total of 5 agents to get the F out of here. And in a statement online, DHS said the following: US Border Patrol was conducting a targeted immigration enforcement operation against a illegal alien previously charged with felony theft and convicted of illegal possession of stolen property. As the agents exited their vehicle, they encountered a female matching the description of the target. Agents identified themselves as the individual ran toward her residence. No arrests were made. So NBC News reports that roughly 75,000 people, by the way, that have been arrested by immigration agents have no criminal records at all, no misdemeanor, no minor crimes, no major crimes. 75,000 of the 222,000 people who have been arrested by immigration agents. Cenk.
Yeah, as we've told you before, when Trump shut down the border, whether you like it or not, his popularity on immigration was sky high. He then proceeded to punch himself in the face politically about 12 different times. And now his immigration numbers are doing disastrously. Why? Because the American people said, round up the criminals and close the border. They didn't say go after Americans, go after young women, old women, children, etc. They don't like this. They don't want the mass deportation. Like, people can't get it out of their head that the others do not think like you. So if you're in the radical right and you voted for Trump and you love seeing this and you like people being terrorized and running, etc. Okay, I hear you, brother, and you're some percentage of the country. But the overwhelming majority of the country does not like it, and we don't want it, and hence there's going to be electoral consequences. And by the way, I mean, if you think it's bad, his numbers on immigration are bad, wait till you see his numbers with Latinos, because a lot of them believed, him and the MAGA movement, that it wasn't about race. They also wanted to close the border. They also wanted to kick out the criminals. But now that Trump's coming after them, they're like, oh, it turns out they were lying. And that the left that warned us about them, I guess they were right. Because here they are coming after us. Americans or not, whether we've been here a lot for decades or not, whether we're criminals or not, they're coming after us anyway. So now he's at, I think, minus 38 with Latinos. So good luck with that strategy.
I mean, he's not going to run for re-election again, so he doesn't care. The real question is whether the whole of the Republican Party is ready for, the political ramifications of what Trump is up to. Because look, make no mistake about it. Like, going back to Tim Dillon's statement at the very beginning of the segment, like, the cruelty is the point. And there is a growing contingent within the Republican base who obviously very vociferously supported Trump's immigration policies, who are now kind of starting to see the full picture, and they're very furious, including with Kristi Noem. The reason why they're upset is because they see that this is all just theater, right? And that, we see the intentional cruelty, and apparently that's supposed to make us happy. But in terms of the deportation numbers and all of that, they're not really seeing the goods. They're just seeing the intentional cruelty playing out probably in their own cities, to be honest with you, or their own towns.
And one last thing, Anna, if they had a real legitimate reason, and if you're against mass immigration, I get it. You do have legitimate reasons, right? But how that affects people that have been here for decades is a different question. But if you did, the core of that ideology was about jobs and the economy and how we all take care of our own, etc. But they're not going after any of the employers, because the employers have a lot of power and the employers want that cheap labor. So it's not addressing any of the core issues. What they're doing is cruelty for optics reasons.
Yes, yeah.
Like, distract you from what your actual issue was and get you to, like, be satiated by cruelty that doesn't actually solve it.
Exactly. All right, we got to take our break, but when we come back for the second hour, we'll talk about just how many members of Congress do not plan to come back after the midterms. And we'll also discuss Piers Morgan deciding to have Nick Fuentes on his show. We'll be right back.
Damn it, they failed us. And if you're not angry about that, Michael, and any of you out there, then you're damn wrong, because you should be angry. Young Turks.
It was genuine. He was mad.
Cenk Uygur, known online as one of the Young Turks, isn't afraid to throw some punches.
3, 2, 1, fade up.
Cenk the Turk Uygur.
What kind of TV station is this? The whole point is for me to yell and scream and tell you what I think.
It was right out of like Wayne's World.
This guy on this little rinky-dink website is speaking truth to power. We've been averaging 600,000 views a day, beating most of the cable shows in America.
We're the largest online news show in the world.
We're celebrating our 1 billionth view.
Television, we're coming.
More politics ahead with Cenk Uygur.
He knew that the MSNBC opportunity was an experiment.
And fill and host beat CNN and headline news combined. At some point, they want to give me a show.
Every single year, that comes out of our paycheck. We put it in, and you're saying we were suckers.
When you, as a host, tells someone you're interviewing to shut up, that's going to raise a red flag.
That guy needed a tall glass of shut up juice.
If President Obama's doing the wrong thing, I'm not going to tell you that he's doing the right thing so I can, quote, support him.
He says to me, "You won't believe the meeting that I just had."
The head of MSNBC talked to me.
And they want him off the air.
Cenk took an incredible risk.
We're supposed to challenge the government. That's the role of the media. The Democrats and the Republicans are here to screw you. And who on the air is saying it?
I wouldn't have done what he did.
That if I'm going to be a talk show host, I should be the biggest talk show host in the country. I don't think anyone else does it better. I don't think anyone's even close.
Before you know it, I'll be back on your TV doing a national show. I guarantee it.
Magic. It's showtime. And say 45 minutes. I'm hosting today. Now, I know what you're thinking, Jerry, your face is already perfect, but you know what? I still need to apply some makeup. I went through this process, right? A few years ago, when I realized that I was gonna have to put makeup on the show. I had to go through like finding out what my undertones were. You guys know what those are? I got my MAC Cosmetics. It says SPF 15 foundation, broad spectrum. But apparently what I have is red undertones, and I think pores are not supposed to be seen. I need all these things to be confirmed for me. These sponge things don't work for me. You gotta use your hands. This idea. That's how the magic really happens. So we're gonna go through a tutorial how to make the magic happen from beautiful to beautifuler. Let's go. I've already been moisturized. That's the first thing. But moisturization already happened. We go raw. All hands. Pick up. Couple streaks. This is the guy way of putting on makeup. We got dots. There's some shiny points that generally happen. First of all, here we go. You dust here. I'm putting way too much, but you dust. Oh, get the excess off. You don't want chunky powder. There's like a T-zone, I think, right? Mine is a double T-zone. Because I went middle and another cross. Make sure your nose isn't all shiny. People get on you for it. You know, say, that's not a good point you made on there, JR. Your nose is shiny. You guys are picky like that sometimes. I think that's about it, fellas and ladies. See you guys next time. Bitsies.
I just love you.
All right, welcome back to the Young Turks. Cenk and Anna with you guys. Generally speaking, happy holidays, everyone. I feel like between Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's all holidays is fair game. I could say to you every day, and I might. All right, Casper, what do we got next?
Well, a bunch of lawmakers are leaving Congress for good. So here's your good feel story of the day.
Republican Senator Tom Tillis announcing that he will not be seeking re-election next year in the battleground state of North Carolina.
I'll be resigning from office with my last day being January 5th, 2026.
That is why I want you, my fellow San Franciscans, to be the first to know. I will not be seeking re-election to Congress.
In my heart, I know it's time to pass the torch. So I'm announcing today that I will not be seeking re-election at the end of my term.
Dozens of congressional lawmakers do not plan to run for re-election. Some of them are even resigning before their term is up. And this could really have an impact on the makeup of both the House and the Senate, but mostly the House. Now, according to USA Today, more than 50 other lawmakers are not planning to run for re-election for their current seats. 40 of them are in the House of Representatives alone. And before we get to all the various reasons that they're citing for not wanting to run for re-election, Cenk, what are your 2 cents?
Oh my God, dozens of Congress people are retiring. Don't threaten me with a good time.
For real.
The only one that, in a deep turn of irony here, that I regret, like the one that I wish wasn't retiring, is Marjorie Taylor Greene. But the rest of them, as I saw that video, I was like, yes, terrific.
So before we get to the people who are retiring or not running for re-election, and there are various reasons why, I have to say, Marjorie Taylor Greene had an interview with 60 Minutes, which we're not covering because 60 Minutes will copyright strike you in a second, and it's the most frustrating thing in the world. But to be fair, most of what she had talked about during the interview, we've covered in the context of her other interviews. So it's nothing that you haven't heard before. But what is interesting is Trump's response to it. So 60 Minutes, of course, is part of CBS, which was purchased by David Ellison and Paramount. Trump is mad at CBS and now claims that CBS's news coverage is even worse than before, which I just think it's I think it's hilarious. It's like, you know exactly what happened with the purchase of CBS. Like, you know about it, right? You know about the David Ellison takeover. You know about the Barry Weiss getting hired basically to drown out any criticism of Israel. But it doesn't matter. He just wants favorable coverage for himself day in and day out. And anyone who says anything negative about him, he'll freak out. And that's exactly what happened following the interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, just 2 quick thoughts there. So it's funny because he's criticizing Paramount Skydance because they allowed, let's be honest, probably the most pro-America first, pro-MAGA, most right-wing congressperson to come on there and state her opinions. I mean, if that's like, okay, so even that's not allowed. The only thing that's allowed is you must be 100% pro-Trump and you must be 100% pro-Israel. Otherwise, not good enough, and you should all be banned, etc.
Correct. Yeah, that is the take. That is the take. And by the way, I have to be honest, I was even a little bit surprised that 60 Minutes was allowed to air that interview, because there were definitely moments where Marjorie Taylor Greene accused Trump of turning his back on the America First agenda and instead spending way too much time and our resources in, doing Israel's bidding. And she even called out AIPAC. I don't know if Barry Weiss's head exploded behind the scenes, but that did happen and they did air it.
All right, yeah. And then I want to tell you a secret reason why they're leaving too, but let's give you all the stated reasons first.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, as many as 50 congressional lawmakers are leaving Congress after the midterms. 40 of these seats are from the House alone, which does bolster claims that Democrats are poised to take over the House after the midterms. Now, we're gonna get into what this all means in just a second. But look, throughout the year, we have kind of touched on various individuals in Congress who had announced they're not running for re-election. Once their term is over, they're not coming back. And looking at the big picture, members of the House are leaving at a record rate, especially when it comes to members of the Republican Party. So again, that further bolsters predictions that Democrats are going to take over the House. So let's take a look at this graph. This is from Axios, and it shows that Republican retirements and resignations are outpacing Dems at a 2-to-1 ratio. And typically the party with more departures, tends to not win the majority. So more Republicans leaving doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be replaced with other Republican candidates, especially as the pendulum is kind of swinging against Trump and his policies a year into his second term. So why are the members leaving? Well, some say, look, what's the point? The political gridlock makes it impossible to get anything done. I want to be naive and believe that's the main reason. But that would mean I'd have to believe that they actually wanted to get things done. Redistricting efforts leading to tougher re-election races. I definitely believe that's impacted the decisions for a lot of these lawmakers. But mainly lawmakers don't see a point in even trying anymore, especially when you're dealing with an administration that undermines their role in Congress and basically undermines who they're supposed to be representing, which is the people of their districts or the people of their states. Simply put, says Representative Jared Golden, who's a Democrat from Maine, what I could accomplish in this increasingly unproductive Congress pales in comparison to what I could do in that time as a husband, a father, and a son. I don't know if I believe that argument, but what do you think, Cenk?
Yeah, I don't believe it at all. I believe he's going to get nothing done in Congress, but that's not the bug, that's the feature. The donors don't want them getting anything done. That's why they sit around like jackasses and have done nothing for like the last 50 years. Oh, we passed one Obamacare and 12 tax cuts for the rich and started many wars and helped Israel. I got it. So look, the ostensible reasons are real. So yeah, the Republicans are very likely to lose the midterm elections and lose power. And whenever a party's about to lose more of their members, absolutely, right? The redistricting makes a lot of those those fights harder, and they just like being able to take bribes and then cruise to re-election. And so that's going to be a little bit harder for some of them. So those are real issues, right? But there's two kind of secret issues here. One of them won't surprise you. One is that I have a sense, this is more my theory, that some of them are beginning to realize, even if they don't verbalize it this way, that they're all about to get caught, that we're in a different time. So, it's not too grand a theory. Let me just explain it this way. So in the old days, we had the uniparty, corporate Democrats, corporate Republicans, and corporate media was the third leg of that stool, and it was the most important part. So they would pass these tax cuts for corporations and deregulation and everything that hurts America. And corporate media would cheer enthusiastically, oh, bipartisanship, you guys are amazing, and everybody would kiss their ass, etc. Now their own voters, both on the left and on the right, are catching them, going, wait a minute, you actually didn't help us at all. Wait a minute, I see your donors from AIPAC. I see your donors from the drug companies, etc. Oh, I'm beginning to think you're the bad guy. And for those that are savvy enough, they're like, ooh, pack your bags, we gotta run. They're on to us, right? So, but that leads into the last reason that is probably the biggest and one that won't overly surprise you. But of course, if you said this in genteel circles in DC, they're like, oh, I do declare, how dare you? They were going to spend time with their children. No, the reality is they're going to become lobbyists or lawyers or consultants and they're going to cash in on their time in Congress. And they're beginning to think, with the Republicans losing power, with everybody in politics getting caught, oh, wait a minute, I got to go make my money now before it's too late. The whole point was to rob the American people. Yeah, I got money, status, and fame through the campaign contributions, but now it's time to take those bribes and make them personal. So I'll go work for the companies that I assisted in robbing the American people, and they'll give me millions of dollars. That's what almost all of them are going to do right now.
The other thing that I'll just note is you're not really allowed to be your own person and have, operate based on your own principles, morals, values if you're a Republican, because Trump will attack you if you go against his agenda. And in fact, on top of low morale in Congress, it's coupled with threats that lawmakers are getting pretty much on a daily basis, some of them claim. So the US Capitol Police said that it is on track to work through 14,000 threat assessment cases involving members of Congress by the end of this calendar year. And that's a lot, obviously. And if you want to do a comparative analysis, it's up from just 9,000 last year. And we know that Trump will make you a target if you go against his agenda and you happen to be a member of the Republican Party. I mean, he's just as vicious to Democrats. But the problem becomes even worse if you're a Republican who, shares voters with Trump. So I look, Congress has been pretty useless. I agree with a lot of your criticism, Cenk. I wish we had a co-equal branch of government that was effective in serving its role. Right now, Congress isn't. And now you have a growing list of bipartisan lawmakers who are trying to investigate and push back on Trump's, allegation that he's fighting narco terrorists in the Caribbean. These members of Congress are like, there's no authorization from Congress. But this body that we're talking about, okay, both the lower chamber and the upper chamber, have ceded their power to the executive branch, especially as it pertains to war powers. And all of a sudden, they're realizing what the impact of that is. Now, of course, we're talking about other lawmakers who were in Congress at the time after 9/11 when they ceded the bulk of their power to the executive branch. But I didn't see very many people try to claw it back. And so now we have an incredibly powerful executive branch that's using any and all excuses to carry out what very likely are war crimes in the Caribbean.
Yeah, last two things here on that, both related to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Anna, you're right. And what Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying is, she said, look, I got tons of death threats before, and they were mainly from the left, threats and worse, right? But she's like, I was not prepared for what happens from Trump's followers. It's a whole different level. So to which I would say, welcome to the party, you're a little late. Yes, when right-wing, not voters overall, not 77 million people, but right-wing zealots come for you, they say the most outrageous things. And remember, she also crossed Israel. And what a lot of the media definitely doesn't report, and you would have no reason to know unless you were on the receiving end of it, she's also criticized Israel, and the pro-Israel radicals are some of the most, extreme people in the country. Their threats are outrageous and totally on a different level. And so she's getting it from both the pro-Trump radicals and the pro-Israel radicals. And she gave some specific examples. And she's like, what am I doing here? Like, we have almost no power. Nobody ever listens to us. Nobody ever serves the voters. And all we get is these massive threats against our lives, against everything we do. So yeah, of course I have some sympathy for that. And finally, the reason I said the only one that I'm sad to see go is Marjorie Taylor Greene, even though I'm totally on the left and she voted with Trump, like 98% of the time. So I don't agree with her, probably about 98%, maybe 88% of the time. I don't know, but at least she was honest. That to me is way more important than some corporate stooge pretending to be on your side and shivving you in the back the minute you turn around because his donor told him to. So we lost one of the few honest people in Congress. The rest of them were generally useless.
All right, when we come back from the break, we'll get into the Piers Morgan, Nick Fuentes debate that took place today.
All right, back on TYT. Let's go to YouTube members. We haven't gone to them today. Kane's World says, in ye old times, they just accused people they didn't like of being witches. It's referring to the first story we did. Now you get called a domestic terrorist instead. See how sophisticated they are? They changed the word. Bonk says, I got no love for Islam, but that doesn't make Israel right. So look, Bucks, if you say, hey, I got no love for any of the organized religions and here's why, okay, I hear you. I'm an atheist, so I agree. But if you think it's just Islam in terms of the text, brother, read the Old Testament. Even Sam Harris in my epic debate with him admitted, yeah, the Old Testament is the most violent of all the books by a lot, including the Quran, etc. And obviously, organized religion has been used by every religion to do terrible things throughout history. So if you think it's just the Muslims, I think you got that one wrong. But you didn't necessarily say that, by the way. Delivery Ghost said Cenk has aged gracefully. Ooh, that's my favorite comment of the day. I appreciate that. Rebecca Chicken Mama says CBS used to be the best of the three. Walter Cronkite. Yeah, now CBS is generally useless. It's mainly for Israeli propaganda. All right, we have a Fuentes fan. He wrote in on Super Chat. His handle has something to do with nuts, so I can't read the whole thing. Piers Morgan is a clown and a traitor to his own culture, he says. Fuentes is 100% right about the state of Western culture. We, the European diaspora, that's an interesting way of putting it, are not interested in selling our civics away and butchering our traditions. All right, well, we're gonna discuss that in the next segment, so you have that to look forward to. Suffice it to say for now, I do not agree with you. Favaz Synthetic Soul writes in, I'm starting to feel the USA is quietly being bought out, not just by the pro-Israel billionaires who already dominate politics and media, but very soon, Netflix eyeing Warner merger, Paramount pushing big bids. Every deal means fewer companies decide what 330 million Americans see and hear daily. Voters are feeling powerless. Billions in dark money pick winners while wages stall and costs crush families. Elections starting to feel like theater. This isn't healthy capitalism anymore. Big money writes the rules. Regular people get squeezed. Democracy should put citizens first. Frustration rising. Left-wing and right-wing populists might actually agree the system only serves the elite and not everyday Americans. Imagine 2026 progressive. Left and right can unite peacefully for real change, clean elections, break media monopolies, and get big money out of politics, power back to the people. Well, I largely agree with all of that. That's right. And we are getting squeezed, and corporatism is getting more and more powerful and beginning to do massive damage to our institutions and our systems. History Speaks YT writes in, atheist Bill Maher turned into Pat Robertson in his Ana interview, referencing the mythical biblical kingdom of David. Ancient Jewish polities existed, but encompass far less than Israel wants, so they need the kingdom of David to be real. No, yeah, any reference to kingdom of David and all that nonsense is hilarious for an atheist, a so-called atheist. No, atheism is just a front for him, for hatred of Muslims. He doesn't really believe. He doesn't think the three religions are the same at all. We'll be back. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Ana with you guys. We got more news.
All right, let's get to our next story. Piers Morgan had Nick Fuentes on after flirting with the idea for weeks, and it was definitely more contentious than how Tucker Carlson, or quite frankly, anyone else handled an interview with Nick Fuentes. Cenk, what are your 2 cents? What are you expecting?
Yeah, look, I mean, we haven't had Fuentes on either. But this whole not talking to each other is silly. So do I like that Piers Morgan had him on? Sure. Let's have that conversation. Let's expose the ideas we don't agree with, which we're going to talk about here. We're allowed to agree with people who generally we are very much in disagreement with on other issues. Let's just have that conversation. So let's watch these clips here and have an adult talk about it.
So Fuentes gets a lot of attention for his comments and his takes on US support for Israel. And they did get into that discussion about halfway through the nearly 2-hour-long interview. But since everyone's going to be focusing on that, and we have covered that before in other contexts, I wanted to focus on other elements of this conversation that I thought were interesting and somewhat surprising. So Piers Morgan began the interview by reciting what Fuentes said about his own father and whether his father's views of the world have contributed to Fuentes's worldview. Let's take a look.
You talked about your father, Bill Fuentes, and how he wouldn't take the family, including you, to certain restaurants because he believed they were associated with African Americans. We would be deciding where to go to eat, he said. What are we going to do for dinner tonight? It was a running joke. Me and my sister would say Applebee's, and my dad would say we would never eat at Applebee's. Not in a million years should you be caught dead, Fuentes said about Applebee's. Go to a different restaurant, a local restaurant. No Applebee's, no Red Lobster. That is commonly known as black fare. Do you think you grew up in a racist environment, that your father was inherently racist, and that thought process moved to you?
Well, I would say it's a new low. I've been attacked for being a racist many times, but to attack my father, to attack my parents based on anecdotes, I would say that's sort of a new low.
Hang on, it's your anecdote.
Yeah, but he's not here to defend himself.
You are. It's a reasonable question.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think everybody knows what that is, but I'll address it. I'll engage with it, and I'll defend my father from the charge of racism.
Sure.
No, my parents are not racist, and they've never been racist. I'll tell you about my parents. They used to have a school in Chicago in the South Loop where they instructed people on how to shoot firearms. It was a security school, and most of the clients were black.
So he's going to answer a little more in the next clip, but I wanted to show Piers Morgan's question and ask you, Cenk, whether you think that was a fair question to ask of Nick Fuentes.
Look, I wouldn't have gone in that direction. I think it's superfluous. I don't really care what his dad thinks. On the other hand, I'm also not outraged by the question. So what? Answer the question, right? And he did. Look, here's an anecdote I've told on the show, and then let's decide if that's racist, right? So they mentioned Red Lobster. Look, I don't know that Red Lobster is particularly black. I don't know what that means, right? But I have talked. First of all, Red Lobster has excellent cheese biscuits, and you should go.
No, but Red Lobster is delicious. No, hold on. Like that is. I'm offended by the notion that you shouldn't eat it. Like we're not at all, sponsored by Red Lobster. This is an organic plug, I guess. I love Red Lobster. It is delicious.
Yeah. But I've kidded around about, sometimes I'll go to a diner or a restaurant and if I see either cops or black people there, I think nailed it. Because they actually.
The food's gonna be good.
Food's gonna be good, right?
Oh yeah.
So, but that's a funny little anecdote. It doesn't mean that I'm racist against white people and non-cops. So that's why, like, this is a little bit of a waste of time. We should get to Nick Fuentes' opinions. I don't mean us, I mean Piers starting with that. It seems needlessly hostile.
I agree. I think opening with a question about Nick Fuentes' dad is kind of weird, especially considering the fact that Nick Fuentes streams for hours on end each day. And if you want to, actually focus on what Nick Fuentes himself has said about his own views, that would be more interesting. But nonetheless, he did answer the question. Let's go to his answer and then we'll move on.
What my parents would say if they were here is that for many, many years, the older generations of black people were very respectful, very humble, very decent. In fact, my grandma used to have an anecdote. She grew up in a lot of dysfunction. Her mother was mentally ill. And they would be having dinner in the projects, and there'd be so much chaos and dysfunction and disagreement and fighting. And she would look across the way out the window at a black family in the other apartment, and they'd be holding hands around the table saying grace. And this is sort of the culture that used to prevail. But now what you have in the city is that there's no accountability for the black people. And now Chicago has become a complete dump because these teenagers go out and they take over the city. They call them teen takeovers. That's the euphemism for it. They're teenagers, but they all come from the same neighborhood. They drive up there and they mug people and attack people and they destroy cars and destroy shops.
So, okay, so that now we're starting to get into, the territory of what Nick Fuentes actually thinks about the black community. And he's gonna, weigh in on that a lot more in upcoming clips. including, I think, one of the most devastating clips that Piers Morgan played of Nick Fuentes in one of his rants. But before we get to that, Cenk, what are your thoughts on how he answered that?
Yeah, look, I feel like we're constantly stuck in the middle in this way. So are there crime issues in some of the bigger cities? Yeah. By the way, crime's gotten much better in the last year and a half or so. But if you want to address that, no problem. If you want to make it racial, what's the point? What does it solve? Right? So are there issues that affect people in lower socioeconomic classes that affect both blacks, whites, Latinos the same? Yes. And blaming it on one particular race is not that helpful at all. And there he was talking about what was wrong with his own culture, and then he strips to what's now wrong with black culture. But I don't think those are the issue at all. I think class is the issue in that particular case. And so I think he's misdiagnosing the problem pretty significantly.
So he then, yeah, okay. So with that in mind, let's actually just go to the next clip, because this is the one that, caught my attention the most.
They're always coming up with, no, it's not the Jews. No, it's not women. No, it's not blacks. It's actually really complicated. No, it isn't at all. Jews are running society. Women need to shut the up. Blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. And we would live in paradise. It's that simple.
Okay. Would you like to clarify what you meant there?
That's all true. That's 100% true. Everything I said in that clip is true.
Including that blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, all of them?
No, for the most part.
What does the most part mean? What percentage of American blacks would you like to see in prison?
Whatever the percentages of the murderers. I think it's 1 in 20 black men will commit a murder in their lifetime. So maybe let's say that, 5%.
Oh, so you're talking about black people who murder people?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But you didn't say that. You just said blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. You didn't clarify that you were talking about black murderers.
Right.
Okay, so he's going, now they're about to debate actual, per capita homicide numbers broken down by race. And they're actually both wrong, so stay tuned for that. But I mean, he just owns it, right? So he listens to that video of himself, not just going after black people, going after women, going after, various groups of people based on their identity, essentially lumping them all together as, a stereotype. And when he has an opportunity to say, no, there's more context on that, or no, let me explain what I meant, he just kind of owned it. So this is the thing about Fuentes and then his supporters as well. Because whenever you just say what he says he is, right? When he says that he's an anti-Semite, or when he says, that he thinks, most black people should be imprisoned, and then he has an opportunity to clarify whether he actually believes it, and he says, yeah, I believe it, and doubles down. Why do you guys get upset with people who clearly just repeat what Nick Fuentes says of himself?
Yeah, that's the part I don't understand, Anna. I feel like both Fuentes and his supporters kind of have to make up their mind.
Yeah.
Are you guys avowedly and excitedly racist, sexist, etc., or are you not, right? And I don't mind either, you just tell me. But so that clip of Fuentes is by definition racist and sexist, right? And those are terms we don't like here. There's way too many identity politics being played, and it's usually distract you from the great American robbery where the donors are robbing you blind. But what is that? I mean, if you're saying arrest black murderers, why are you even putting the qualifier black? Why don't we arrest all murderers? Right? So, but you didn't say that in the beginning. And in fact, Piers almost bailed him out there. No, he said imprison a great percentage of black people. So now, if you're in that camp, do you think black people are going to agree with you? That's absurd, right? Do you think women, 51% of the country, are going to agree that they should all shut up? So that it's okay, you have whatever you have, opinions you have, it's a free country, right? But then don't come and say pretend you're the victims. And I can't believe anybody called me sexist when I said all women should shut up.
So yeah, look, I obviously the idea that most black people should be in prison is disgusting, and I disagree with it wholeheartedly. The point that Fuentes, I think, is trying to make is that when it comes to homicides, the perpetrators who carry that out are unfortunately disproportionately Black. And it's an uncomfortable statistic to bring up, but both he and Piers Morgan got the numbers wrong. In fact, both he and Piers Morgan thought the numbers were much higher than they really are. So they debate the numbers. You heard Fuentes in that last video say that he thinks that 1 in 10 Black men commit murder. Okay, which is insane.
It's insane.
It is. It is insane. But then Piers Morgan tries to correct him and says that the real number is 1 in 100, which is also insane. So he's misinterpreting numbers. I don't think that Piers Morgan is racist. I just think that he's like misinterpreting the studies and the numbers. So I looked into this, and I think he's referencing a study in JAMA that was actually released in February of this year. The study was conducted by Paula Strassel from the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the University of Maryland. And here's what the study found. We can put the graph up on the screen, and on the far right side, you have whites represented. In the middle is where you have, Black individuals who have carried out homicides represented. Okay, so in the data set that's being studied here is between the year 2000 and 2019, and the homicide rate for Black males ages 15 through 24 was around 74.6 per 100,000 population, or about 1 in 1,340 men in that age group specifically. Now that age group tends to, young men in general tend to be more aggressive, tend to, be more likely to act violently, right? So that's why you see that age group, overrepresented even within the various demographics or identities we're talking about here. And then there are years where the numbers are even worse, reaching as high as 101.5 per 100,000 in 2023. For Black males aged 24 to 44, the rate was around 70 per 100,000. And then keep in mind that the researcher isn't just relying on like raw numbers here, right? Putting this in a per capita perspective helps you kind of understand what the realities are in terms of which demographics are more likely to carry out this particular crime, which happens to be homicide and murder. So those are just the facts. I'm not making anything up, and I'm basing this on a study that was published just this year.
Yeah, look, when you have at worst case scenario 1 out of 1,340, and you say it's majority instead, which implies 600-700, right? No, that's not right. It's just not factually correct. And yeah, that is what leads to racism. So look, I've used this analogy before because Turks are such a rando ethnicity here in America that it helps clarify things. So do Turks in Germany have a higher crime rate than Turks in America? Yes. Why? Does it have anything to do with them being Turkish? No, because more day laborers, blue collar guys go to Germany from Turkey because they could drive there. And so they're lower socioeconomic status. Turks in America happen to be pretty well off. So the crime rate is like nearly non-existent. So this is a socioeconomic issue, and you see it playing out across all the races here in America as well. So on the one hand, sometimes people deny the numbers, and that's not helpful, right? So are you going to get a higher percentage of per capita of African Americans that commit more crime here in America? Yes. Why is that? Because of socioeconomic conditions. And one last rando Turkish one. Tell the story of near the Syrian border in Turkey, where my parents grew up. An explosion of crime happened. Why? Because there's these absurd laws about tariffs, and they made a lot of money by ignoring the tariffs and doing smuggling across the border. Why did they do it? Because they were all poor. It wasn't like, oh my God, some breakout of immorality happened near the Syrian border. No, these are just normal things that happen in life, and you shouldn't ignore them, and you should also figure out what the real causes are instead of just blaming people in a blanket way. One last thing, Anna, when it comes to Israel, same thing. The media will say, no, there are no donors that favor Israel, but that's not true at all. Of course there are. And they give hundreds of millions of dollars, and they say that doesn't affect politicians. That's absurd. Of course it affects politicians. Does that mean all Jews are part of a global scheme? No, most Jews, the overwhelming majority of Jewish Americans have normal jobs and normal lives and have nothing to do with Israel or the IDF or anything like that. So that's why these generalizations based on the wrong characteristics and focusing on the wrong traits of people doesn't help at all. Sometimes you'll identify the right problem and have a very wrong solution.
Yep. All right, we got to take our final break. When we come back, we'll get into what has Laura Loomer and Ted Cruz upset at Tucker Carlson today. So don't miss it. We'll be right back.
All right, let's go to Super Chat. Rage Rock for now says, I wish Cenk and Ana were more popular and that Nick Fuentes was less popular. Fuentes moves the needle to a very alarming and concerning extent. But look, that one's a little bit more complicated. First of all, when you take the TYT network, we're larger than almost everyone you've ever heard of. But since we piss off the establishment so much, they almost never give us credit for that. So it's a little bit, and things go up and down, right? We've now battled so many different people throughout internet history, and they'll peak and then they'll go down, they'll peak and they'll go down. And it's a little bit of a sign of the times more than it is about any particular person. And outrage sells. So like, I know some people are outraged by us, but we're generally very rational, right? And so it's harder to get people that are like, get people riled up, writing stories, talking about you, etc., when you're saying reasonable things. So, all right, Callie Millie writes in, Ana, that's amazing. I never thought my TYT host would be in a position to drop truth on Bill's audience. For 2 years on HBO, he's had the most biased hour-long show with no Muslim guests to offer a counter perspective. Disco Stew 2916 said, that first story today makes me think of the Stasi police in Germany and how neighbors were rewarded for snitching on each other. Is this what they're aspiring for? The frickin' Stasi? Add ice to that, and we are so effed. So that first story where they are looking to target anyone that is basically not a Trump supporter and have the FBI investigate them. It's a disaster, but he makes a good point. The second reason we didn't emphasize enough of why it's a disaster is it's asking you to turn in your fellow neighbors. And that is police state 101. It's really as disgusting as it gets. Writer Dragon said, I would ask Bill Maher who's paying him to lie. But as I mentioned earlier, I don't think Bill thinks he's lying. I think he genuinely thinks that those Palestinians deserve to be occupied. They deserve to have Gaza taken from them. They deserve to be bombed. And that the only people who get to have self-defense are the Israelis. And if a Muslim asks for self-defense, they're a terrorist. So that's his genuine belief, and that's why he's a really bad guy, in my opinion. Fawaz Synthetic Soul says, oh, by the way, for Bill Maher type of creatures, even Saudi Arabia has ancient churches for Christians. Yeah, there are Christians living in Saudi Arabia. But I'm sure that comes as news to him. Mark Francis 07664 says, Red Lobster sucks except for the rolls. The seafood itself sucks. But look, this is the beauty of this country is that you're allowed to have wrong opinions like that. And we don't mind. And we're not gonna ban you or deplatform you. In fact, we love you, you're a member. Lady AF said, one of my 6-year-old memories is going to a Red Lobster and playing with my lobster the entire time. That's a fun memory. One of my Red Lobster memories is that once I finally had enough money, which took me years and years as a part-time radio talk show host, I finally got to take my girlfriend to Red Lobster, which I thought was a super fancy date. So that's my memory of Red Lobster. So we're about to run out of time. All right, I'm out of time. We'll be right back, guys. time, TYT, Cenk and Ana with you guys. Hey, save money, guys, over the weekend, over the holidays. TYT.com/switch. Switch your wireless service. It takes about 5 minutes and you'll save a ton of money. TYT.com/switch. Theo Ek3 EQ3EI, thank you for joining us by hitting that join button below. That helps the show tremendously. We appreciate you. Casper.
All right, let's get into Tucker Carlson's weekend, where he did something that really upset Laura Loomer, Mark Levin, Ted Cruz, the same old, same old. Let's get into it.
Well, I'm confused then. If you hosted Hamas here and sent money to Gaza, both of those things at the request of the US government and the Israeli government, successive Israeli governments, why did Israel bomb your country?
I don't know if any of the actions that's been or many of the actions that's been taken been justified or rationalized or even were ethical actions. To have the mediator being bombed by one of the parties of the conflict, this has been unprecedented.
Over the weekend, Tucker Carlson visited the Doha conference in Qatar, and he even took time to interview the prime minister. His name is Mohammed Abdul Rahman Al Thani. And now all of Tucker Carlson's Israel First nemesis are absolutely furious with him. That's the fun part of the story. But before we get to it, Cenk, your 2 cents.
Whether we like it or not, Qatar is our top ally in the Middle East. We have a base there. They house our troops. They help negotiate peace treaties. We have gas deals with them. They're actually useful allies. Israel is a totally useless ally that sucks off of us and takes our money and gets us into wars and conflicts. And so now you're going to see the Israeli bootlickers in America tell us about how we should serve Israel and not actually deal with our real ally, which is Qatar.
So Tucker opened the conversation with the prime minister by discussing the various accusations that Qatar has been dealing with, including the allegation that it finances terrorists, including Hamas. Here's how Al Thani responded.
The main criticism seems to revolve around Hamas, and the idea is that your country and you specifically are supporters of Hamas, you're terror financiers. My understanding is Hamas is here in Doha because the United States and Israel asked you to host Hamas.
Starting off the relationship with Hamas and the communication was started back more than 10 years, 13 years ago, at the request of the United States. All our aid and all our support and financing that went and what they claimed that it went to Hamas, went to Gaza, went to the people, and it was under very transparent process that the United States is fully aware about. Israel is the one who's facilitating, and it's not one government, it was across governments. Netanyahu, Bennett, we have dealt with all the agencies. Lapid was a prime minister at a certain point of time, Mossad, Shin Bet, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, all of the, and the defense, all of them, they were involved in these aids and the delivery of those aids.
I don't really know how any country could trust the United States or especially Israel. I mean, we all know that Netanyahu facilitated the funding of Hamas through Qatar. We all know that. It's now on the public record. And for those who want more information on that, great documentary to watch. It's available on Amazon, I believe, The Bibi Files. So why would you trust the United States when they say, please have Hamas here because we need a way to negotiate? You should never trust the United States government as long as it is aligned with Israel.
Yeah, but Anna, to be fair to us and to even be fair to Trump, he was kind of irate when Israel bombed Qatar, and for a number of reasons, including Qatar giving him a jet, et cetera, but also because Qatar has a huge military base that houses our troops there that we absolutely need and is very strategic for us. So we did stick up for Qatar a little bit, and that's the Israel First crowd was livid over that, right?
In fact, sorry to interrupt you, but since you're talking about that Trump being livid thing, remember you had the Israelis claim, no, we got Trump's blessing to do strikes in Qatar, and Qatar. That came up during this discussion. So I just want to play that video real quick before you finish your point. Take a look.
President Trump basically told the Israelis to apologize to you. He took your side. He took the side of an Arab country against Israel in this specific case. I don't think I've ever seen that before. I don't think it's ever happened before. What was your reaction to that?
Well, of course, President Trump was very clear from the beginning since the attack. Actually, when he was informed about the attack, he assigned one of his advisors to reach out to us. He expressed his frustration, his disappointment from such a thing that's happening by Israel, because he knows everything about the process and he knows how helpful we were throughout this process.
You're saying that the president didn't know that was going to happen. He was surprised.
It was very clear demonstration with all the actions that this is something happened against his will, and he doesn't accept it.
Now, Trump's actions in essentially favoring Israel, regardless of what they do, has led me to believe that he's not someone to be trusted on this issue at all. So, and look, we hear about US presidents wagging their fingers at Israel or writing strongly worded letters. I don't buy any of it. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and believe the prime minister of Qatar. It does appear that Trump was really upset that Israel did what it did in carrying out these strikes. And remember, he also forced Benjamin Netanyahu to apologize to Qatar in a phone conversation. So I will believe that. But I think it probably has to do with the fact that Qatar has served as an intermediary, a real important ally in establishing, ceasefires, peace deals, things like that.
So look, the context shows you who you can trust and can't trust. So for example, with Qatar, I've never seen them go back on anything that they promised. As far as that I've ever seen in covering news for 30 years now. The Saudis, on the other hand, pretend to be our allies, and 15 out of the 19 9/11 hijackers were Saudi. And during the insurgency in Iraq, the Saudis funded a lot of the insurgency against us. So proof's in the pudding. Now, when you get to Israel, oh my God, you'd be nuts to trust them. They're the least trustworthy country on the planet. They give you a pager, it's gonna blow up. They give you anything that's involved with cybersecurity, and it's totally jerry-rigged to give them all your information. They spy on even their top allies like us endlessly. They betray every word they give. They ask Qatar to host Hamas. They asked them. And then they bombed Qatar for hosting Hamas. I mean, it doesn't get any more untrustworthy than that. And that's Israel in a nutshell. I think every so-called ally of Israel is doing it under duress. I think that there are forces inside their governments and their media that is forcing them to support Israel, because no rational human being would consider Israel an ally when they betray their allies 24/7.
So let's talk a little bit about how people reacted to Tucker Carlson, A, being in Qatar in the first place, and B, having this conversation with the prime minister. So as we mentioned, Carlson's three biggest haters, that includes Laura Loomer, Mark Levin, and Senator Ted Cruz, all spent the weekend just absolutely raging out about this. Loomer wrote that Qatar wants the United States to pay for rebuilding Gaza. Tucker Carlson interviewed the prime minister in Doha today, and he said Qatar isn't going to pay for Gaza to be rebuilt. You see, Qatar had no problem financing the destruction of Gaza by continuing to fund Hamas. This woman is so stupid. Like, she's so ignorant, dumb, and also physically unappealing. Like, this woman is like, there's nothing going for her. Okay. Your daddy, Bibi, okay, facilitated the funding of Hamas through Qatar, you freaking idiot, number one. Number two, why would any country be responsible for paying for the reconstruction of Gaza, which the Israelis are hell-bent on snatching for themselves? You want foreign countries to bankroll the construction of Israeli settlements? Because that's essentially what would happen, number one. Number two, let's say in a perfect scenario in which Palestinians are allowed to return to, where their homes used to be in Gaza and still are able to access land that belongs to them. Shouldn't Israel and the United States, since we armed them, gave them the bombs to destroy that entire enclave, shouldn't we be the ones that fund the reconstruction of Gaza for the Palestinians specifically? Which, by the way, it sucks to even have to do that, right? But we're the ones who caused the destruction.
So Anna, there's two different parts of Gaza. And so the part where the Palestinians still live, Israel destroyed it. And so if anyone pays, it should be Israel. But of course they'll never pay because they're brutal occupier terrorists. Terrorists don't pay for their own crimes. But there's 53% of Gaza that Israel now occupies. And they say comical things like, yeah, you should pay us to rebuild it for Israel, and then Israel should keep it. Oh, wink, we'll give it back at some point. They're never gonna give it back. And why would I pay for you to build condos on Palestinian children's graves? You freaking monsters. Nobody's gonna pay for that half.
Over the weekend, Israel announced that the yellow line is the new border between Gaza and Israel.
Yeah, that's it. And the yellow line is where 53% of Gaza is now being occupied by Israel. And so they're saying, yeah, we stole it. The Young Turks were 100% right. This was always about mass murder, ethnically cleansing the Palestinians off of half of Gaza and stealing Gaza. But when you watch traditional media, those liars will lie to you on behalf of Israel. And if you ask them, hey, did Israel take half of Gaza? They'll say yes, but they're gonna let the Palestinians back in. Well, you said what? They just voted that they're never letting the Palestinians back in. Yes, but shut up, you're an anti-Semite. So yeah, I mean, look, what Tucker Carlson did there was a perfectly normal interview with a head of state who's an ally of ours. Loomer and Ted Cruz and all those guys, they work for Israel, so they spent the weekend kissing Netanyahu's sphincter. So yeah.
Loomer also made fun of Carlson's former struggles with alcoholism. He's been sober for many, many years now. Stated that Carlson's goal was to lose Republicans the midterms, and also predicted that he would convert to Islam because he can't be part of a religion that worships a Jew. Now, Mark Levin stated that Carlson was pimping for Qatar. In fact, look, I will say this: the only real contribution that Mark Levin has made to American society is the hilarious nickname of Qatarlson, which I know he's like trying to insult him, but I think it's really funny and I like saying it. But Senator Ted Cruz, took it up a notch and said live footage of Tucker Carlson interviewing the Prime Minister of Qatar, and then he featured a photoshopped image or AI image of Tucker Carlson spreading his legs. No mention of how often Ted Cruz spreads his legs for anyone who he might think could help him politically or might help him ingratiate himself with power players in the Republican Party. But anyway, Cenk, final word.
So yeah, for example, we don't take any money from any foreign government, Qatar or otherwise, right? Ted Cruz has taken millions of dollars from the Israeli lobby. So that picture and all of these accusations by all of them are just telling on themselves. So when Mark Levin says, oh, he's just representing Qatar in America, that's because Mark Levin represents Israel in America, and he thinks everyone is a traitor like him. He's just trying to figure out, who are you a traitor for? Mark, others are not traitors. Only you think that way, and your fellow Israel First people like Laura Loomer, et cetera, who love betraying our country for the country they actually love. And then when I see that picture of the spread legs, I think Ted Cruz must have photoshopped it from his own collection. So, because that is all that Ted Cruz has ever done, is open up his sphincter in his mouth for Israeli donors, and they have pummeled him repeatedly. And he has loved it. He has loved every minute of it. He has loved betraying the voters of Texas, betraying the voters of America on behalf of a foreign country. And he often will admit it, including on Tucker Carlson's show. He says, I got into the Senate to serve Israel. I'm not saying you're a traitor. You're kind of saying you're a traitor. And these guys have the nerve, the audacity to criticize anyone for just interviewing a foreign official. Dude, you interviewed a foreign official with your mouth, okay? And so don't tell me about how you're worried about foreign influence when they're inside your mouth. Yeah, Ted Cruz, take Netanyahu out of your mouth, and then maybe I could hear you.
All right, that does it for the main show. Cenk, what do you have coming up for the revolution?
It is a little awkward word, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, but you're really good at naming things, so.
I am. I'm awesome. Okay, so we got a great guest for you guys. We're going to talk about how we can effectuate change, as we always do. Why? Because we're part of Team Hope. We believe that we can actually unify people and actually get them to fight back and take our government back. And the other part of it is that if we don't, well, then you're never getting your government back, and the donors are going to be in charge, and we're all going to get robbed. So you might as well join the fight. It's a peaceful political fight to try to get our government back. So we'll do that when we return. All right, welcome to the revolution, where you and I are starting a revolution together, and we don't really care what part of the political spectrum you're in. We just want to get our government back. Well, there was a person inside the government who didn't like how things were going, so he walked out. His name is Michael Duffin, and he's now running in Virginia's 8th congressional district. Michael, welcome.
Thank you so much, Cenk.
All right, so Michael, which State Department were you working for? Let's start there.
I worked in the Bureau of Counterterrorism on terrorism prevention for 9 years, and then I was one of the people, the 1,300 people who were part of the reduction in force, the RIF by Doge on July 11th.
Okay, and you walked out with I believe a sign that said "Diplomacy matters, Feds matter." Is that right? And what did that mean to you?
I was frustrated. I'm still frustrated with the billionaires first foreign policy, where you have Jared Kushner and others going around the world with a tin cup asking foreign leaders to contribute to their business deals. And so the work that we have done or I did personally for 9 years on preventing terrorism, I still feel that it matters. And so that was a statement that this work will not be replaced by the contractors that Doge or others, the administration hires. And it's not replaced by this parachute diplomacy where Trump's business buddies just swoop in and try and make a deal that's not going to last. By the time that they get back to Washington, the deal has fallen, the piece has fallen apart. We've seen this.
Yeah. So you worked on white supremacy. You almost got fired by Kash Patel before.
It was during the first Trump administration. The story is Rich Grenell, as you know, he was our ambassador to Germany. And I did some exchanges between US and German mayors, and the German mayors really wanted to do more activity exchange best practices with US mayors on white supremacy. So I submitted a proposal to our embassy, and Rich Grinnell contacted Kash Patel. And thankfully at that time, there were guardrails where people like that were not allowed to fire nonpartisan subject matter experts like me. But obviously, that's not the case with Trump 2.0.
Yeah, so I want to come back to why they were, want to fire people like you. But what do you think was happening with Doge overall? Like, so you were kind of a victim of Doge in a sense. So what do you think their actual agenda was?
It was to send a message. Certainly they weren't trying to save money. They sent a lot of our taxpayer money to Argentina. So that was not, cost savings was not on the agenda. It was, they wanted to, all the subject matter experts at the State Department, the 1,300 of us, when we were fired, it let everyone know if you step out of line, you're gonna get the hook. And so some people have said, well, 1,300 out of 70,000 plus people, that's not a lot. But the reality is we were like the scouts, the quarterbacks, the brain of the State Department. And we were the ones who told our embassies overseas about what to look for, because they're like, in terms of counterterrorism, they're not subject matter experts. So we told them what questions to ask foreign governments. We would have, I traveled overseas often, did assessment trips in partnership with USAID. And in terms of our intelligence, a lot of people don't know that the agencies like CIA, the National Counterterrorism Center, they rely on embassy reporting. So if we're not telling our embassies what to report on, then the intelligence community isn't getting as much information. And it's not all secret squirrel stuff. It's a lot of conversations about what's going on in your government, or who are these bad guys who are organizing outside of the embassy, and what are their intentions?
So that's strange, Michael. I actually haven't heard that part of the story before. So why fire the guys who are the biggest experts on terrorism and the subject matter experts? You would think that those would be the most valuable. So why target them, do you think?
I'm happy to criticize Democrats, and I'm happy to say good things about Republicans when they do good things. And so in the first Trump administration, they really prioritize counterterrorism. And so it was my thinking that the people that I had worked with directly were going to come back, or people like them would come back. And it was a head scratcher for me. And we even thought that Sebastian Gorka, with all of his shenanigans, he would want to work with us. We had ideas about how we could equitably partner with him. But Doge came with their laptops, their spreadsheets, and they basically took a pound of flesh from each bureau at the State Department, including counterterrorism. And that was something that was a head scratcher for me, because everyone that I talked to across Washington said, well, you guys are gonna get spared. And obviously we didn't. And it wasn't just the two offices that were fired that worked on white supremacy. A lot of people older veterans felt compelled to take early retirement. And so my final point on your question is, since 9/11, we haven't had a 9/11 scale attack in our country. The counterterrorism apparatus, it's been clunky, but it kept us safe, and so that was the main point. And with the FIFA World Cup next year and the 250th anniversary of our country, bad guys are looking to do bad things in our country, and the people who are the experts are either fired or they're working on immigration enforcement.
Okay, Michael, you got me officially worried because I know why they fired all the top white collar crime experts at the IRS, the SEC, and so many organizations, because Trump likes white collar crime. He likes financial fraud. He's engaged in financial fraud a lot. A lot of his donors are engaged in financial fraud, and they're going to do a lot of crypto stuff. So that, to me, I get it. I understand why they do it. Now, when you tell me they fired mainly the counterterrorism guys, that makes me very worried.
It makes me worried too. And so the thing that I've said I've written several op-eds since I've been separated from the government. And one point that I've made several times is this work is not something you could just jump into if let's say you get a PhD from Harvard in terrorism studies. Working for the government, it has its quirks, and it takes several years to figure out what's going on. And when you listen to someone like Sebastian Gorka, who in 2025 is still talking about bin Laden, the porn stash. I mean, I've watched several interviews, I've been in meetings with him, and he constantly talks about it. It's just like he's been frozen since 2011. And so I and the people that I worked with, we actually understood how to mobilize other governments to do the right thing. For example, Syria and Iraq, we had tens of thousands of people around the world go there, and many women and children have been stuck in detention camps or camps in northeast Syria. And so we convinced governments to bring those people back because the kids were watching, they were inundated with ISIS propaganda. So whatever your security concerns about a 10-year-old kid, it's better that they're back at their home in Kazakhstan or Belgium than it is them watching ISIS videos and being trained, groomed by ISIS fighters in northeast Syria.
Oh boy. So tell me what your particular specialty was within the State Department.
I developed prevention programs that were focused on communities that we deemed, or individuals that we deemed were vulnerable to radicalization, to violence. And I'll give you a domestic example. So the individual who allegedly shot the 2 National Guards people recently, he didn't enter this country radicalized. He had, I'm gonna speculate a little bit, and please bear with me, but probably had some difficulties in his life, and he had spent some time online, and there was plenty of ISIS propaganda there that radicalized him, that told him to do what he did. And so in empowering social workers, teachers, religious leaders, this is what you need to look for. A lot of people are in denial about the person next to them on the bus, or their friend. Oh, he's having a rough time. He'll snap out of it. And then they do what they do, just like the individual who drove the truck through the French Quarter on January 1st in New Orleans and killed 11 people. There are warning signs. People, their lives are falling apart, and people aren't born terrorists. It's just they fall in a rut a lot of times, and then they get exposed to this horrific propaganda that's online. That includes white supremacists.
I'm going to ask you kind of a question a little bit off the beaten path here. So one of the things I worry about, but I don't know if I'm right to worry about it, is that when you have people who are vulnerable and who are online, and I don't say vulnerable in terms of sympathy, I just say it in terms of you see them reeling, they're going in the wrong direction. So sometimes they'll get egged on by radicals, from what I've read in the articles that cover some of these guys who wind up doing terrorism. Do they ever get egged on and radicalized by perhaps other governments or other folks that are not, that might be closer to state actors? Are you guys ever concerned about that?
Absolutely. So we funded a study that it was published in April of 2024, just over a year and a half ago, on how Russia has been manipulating, co-opting far-right groups. The study was focused on Europe, but I've seen this in the US too. And so, when the location on X of the users was revealed, and people who were so-called MAGA patriots were in Africa or in Central Asia or Europe, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there on the internet. And a country like China or Russia, they can stoke Islamophobia. They can encourage people to commit harm, and especially. There was an example in Sweden where an Islamophobic person burned a Quran, and then that message, the video was amplified all across the Muslim world, and that could lead to deadly protests, and often it does. And so we've seen examples of, you don't need to be in the theater to shout fire to create the stampede anymore. You don't even need to be for the Kremlin. They don't even need Russians to do it. They could be Bulgarians, or they could be Nigerians, and they hide their footprints, their fingerprints. And so it's really hard to detect this. But here's a point that I want to make: that the Global Engagement Center, a sister office of mine, they were completely shut down earlier this year, and so we are completely blind. If you recall the historic, I think it was Henry Stimson. He said, "Gentlemen do not read other gentlemen's mail," and that's why they closed the forerunner to the NSA. we are completely blind to disinformation, and that is scary.
Interesting. Well, I mean, yeah, I don't want to derail the conversation, but there is one state actor who loves propaganda and does a lot of it in America, and that's Israel. And the reason I bring that up, Michael, is because if anyone wants us to be blind to propaganda coming from a different country, it would presumably be an ally, because we get it if the Russians or the Chinese are doing it. We're not overly surprised by that. But if we found that an ally was doing an enormous amount of propaganda and maybe egging people on here in America, that would cause a lot of trouble. And there are a lot of powerful people who wouldn't want that trouble.
Agreed, and that's why we need to have a better understanding. Americans, we're very gullible. A lot of people around the world are gullible to propaganda, but we often see a website and we think it's authentic, or an individual, especially influencers, they are incentivized to talk about a certain topic. And so they're not necessarily a KGB or an FSB agent, but if they're given $100 or a couple $100 to talk about, let's say Jill Stein, or how a political candidate, a Democrat or Republican, doesn't reflect their values, well, they're doing that for money.
Yeah. So, and I don't want folks at home thinking I picked it out of the blue. The reason I mentioned Israel in that context is because Michael mentioned the accounts in Nigeria and India, et cetera. And the ones that were the recent batches that were found were all mysteriously pro-Israel in Calcutta. and in other Indian and Nigerian cities. But anyways, okay, so but again, it's not just any one country. Many do it, and now unfortunately we've let our guard down, which does scare me. So you also mentioned white supremacy. What was your work on white supremacy?
I started countering it in 2016, and we had to go on hiatus when Trump was elected the first time. But as more white supremacist attacks happened in Pittsburgh, in Christchurch, New Zealand, and elsewhere, it was really hard for them to ignore it. And the Congress held the Trump administration officials at the State Department, their feet to the fire. And so I was doing things very covertly, if you will, not like when I say secretively, but just focusing on countering hate and polarization, if you will, and not calling it white supremacist or Islamist violent extremism. And eventually, we just started doing it more openly, and the Trump administration officials bought into it. Obviously, not Kash Patel and Rich Grenell, but they focused on other things, and we were able to designate the Russian imperial movement, and we had robust programming. It wasn't, and this is a misconception that the Trump administration intentionally spreads, that this isn't about changing people's ideology. It's about people who are on a pathway to violence. So if you're a right winger, a far right person, or a far left person, and you want to commit harm, our programs are about ensuring that you're not harming yourself and harming someone, people around you. And so it's not about countering ideology, and that is what I'm concerned about with the national security strategy, and a lot of the executive orders that are coming out of the White House.
Yeah, I mean, we hope that our government functions in a way where you're not going around going, "Hey, I want to discriminate against people's opinions on whether they're just run-of-the-mill right wing, or they're all the way at white supremacists, or they're radical Muslim or radical anything group." You're trying to focus on, yes, but who's going to do violence?
Yeah, and it really, the irony of them canceling our program and essentially zeroing out the counterpart, the domestic counterpart at the DHS. This initiative, it really got life under the first Trump administration. The DHS focused on a public health approach, and so that was the answer for engaging, the advocacy groups that felt like some of the earlier programs were Islamophobic, and so instead of the counter argument to that was like, no, we're focusing on public health, and so community groups bought into this. And going back to your question about Diplomacy Matters, I helped develop this network, the Strong Cities Network, over a decade. And so I recruited dozens of cities around the world. And then it was disassembled overnight because of Doge. But There was domestically, DOJ supported a program, small cities, 10 small cities around the US. One of them was the community right next door to where Melissa Hortman and her husband were murdered in June. The program was canceled in the spring. And then we had a program on countering hate and polarization in Manchester in the UK. That our sponsorship was canceled. The conference happened in February, but then there was an attack on Jews on Yom Kippur back in September. So my point is that our programs are focused in the right areas, doing the right things, a do no harm approach. And these people from Doge and elsewhere in the administration just decided, well, for the DHS side, they installed a 23-year-old MAGA, sycophant who, his prior job to working at DHS was bagging groceries, and that was in ProPublica.
Wait, Michael, I want to go back to something you said there. Wait, you were tracking what exactly when they took you off, and then there was an attack against during Yom Kippur? When was that, and what were you tracking at the time?
We were working in partnership with the mayor's office of Greater Manchester in the United Kingdom because they had the Ariana Grande bombing in 2017. So ever since that attack, we had been working closely with the city on countering hate and polarization. There was a conference in February our embassy in London was supposed to sponsor. They pulled the funding because just because Trump told us to cancel everything, or Doge told us to cancel everything. The conference happened, it was scaled down, but my point is that there was an attack later in the year where 2 members of the Jewish community were killed by someone who's radicalized. And we could have said, well, we had this program focused in the right areas. And so all of this work, all of this analysis, you're looking for a needle in a haystack with violent extremism and terrorism. And we were finding the needles in the haystack. And so them canceling it and firing me and other people, if it's not like flipping a switch where we could just go back, and even myself, I've been out of government service for 5 months. There's a lot that's happened since then that I'm not aware of. And so you can't just you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And unfortunately, even if there's an administration in 2029 that wants to bring this back, it took decades to get it right. Since since September 12th of 2001, we've been trying to prevent the next 9/11.
All right, last couple of questions about that, and then I want to ask you about your campaign real quick. So if you had to pick one group that you were most concerned might do a domestic terrorist attack, and I understand you're guessing, obviously, and it doesn't mean that everybody in that group is guilty. I'm gonna throw out those normal caveats, but of the different groups that you guys tracked, what had you most concerned?
2 responses. First, in terms of the volume of people that are killed, ISIS Khorasan, they've proven that they can radicalize people to great effect. The places where they've had people either inspired or directed, those individuals have killed a lot of people in Europe and elsewhere. And then secondly, with white supremacists, they're not necessarily focused on killing a dozen or 2 dozen people. They're focused on killing when I say the right people. The assassination of Melissa Hortman in Minnesota sent shockwaves. It was a chilling effect. And so when white supremacists know, just like with Marjorie Taylor Greene with the death threats that she has said that she's received, when people say they know where your kids are going to school at and they have details that are not easily available on the internet, I'm very concerned about that. And I'm also concerned with insider threats, people who are in security services. And this is not based on intelligence. This is just based on things I've observed over time that, people who are the personal, like in the Secret Service, who have access to the president or other high-level senior officials. If one person decides to go rogue, there was a case, Cenk, in 2019 where a State Department official was outed. I knew the guy, I worked with him, and I had no idea if he was a Democrat or Republican, and I didn't know he was on far-right podcasts until he was outed by, I think it was ADL. But my point is that these are people who they hide the warning signs of their radicalization, and even experts like myself are not going to necessarily pick up on them. But they have access to weapons, they have access to senior level officials. And what's more valuable, taking out a high level government official or killing 50 people. I would say it's the former.
Yeah. All right, that's scary stuff. All right, so tell me why you're running for Congress then.
When I was fired, I'm just dissatisfied with the system, and it's not just Republicans what the Trump administration's doing. It's Democrats who are not fighting, and I feel like we've been left federal employees. People have been fired, people who were furloughed. We've lost our jobs, we've lost our health care. Homes in the DC area are not selling well, and so even if you want to escape, you're going to lose if you own a home, you're going to lose significant equity. And so I believe we need fighters in Congress. And I come from a working class background in Chicago. My father was a cop, my grandfather was a firefighter. And so I've just, I have always had political opinions, but just having been fired and presuming that members of Congress on the Democratic side would fight harder for us. Some have, but the ones in Virginia and the guy I'm running against, he hasn't. He's a 75-year-old who's worth over $100 million. He's been in office for over a decade. He's been in politics for over since the 1980s. And accepting corporate money is just not part of it's part of who he is, but it's not part of who I am.
Yeah, feels like you just described half the Democratic Party there. Okay, but so if you were in Congress when people like you were fired, what would you have done?
So what I've done since I've been fired, I've written op-eds in the Orlando Sentinel, the Columbus Dispatch. Granted, these are blue cities, but they're in red states. And so it's important for our elected officials to go on to talk to conservative media and in conservative media markets to talk about the importance of the government and why firing someone at the FDA or firing a scientist at the CDC is going to impact their lives. As you know, the F-35, its parts are made from hundreds of congressional districts. And so if there's talk of getting rid of that fighter jet, you're gonna have literally hundreds of representatives fighting to keep it. With the State Department, we come from all 50 states and territories, and yet when we work for the government, we're part of 6 or 8 congressional districts. It's critical that those representatives understand the value of us. And so in government, I know when you have you're having a meeting, you have 3 main points, and if something is the 5th or the 7th or the 10th priority, it's not going to be raised. And even if you have an opportunity to raise it, the person you're meeting with isn't going to view it seriously. And that's the problem with the guy I'm running against, Don Beyer. He has not prioritized federal employees. He's starting to pick up on my messaging and try to catch up or act like he's doing something. But we need to hold our politicians their feet to the fire. And as you've said on other shows, other interviews, where primaries are a healthy thing. With the Democrats, had Biden been forced to go through the primary process, we would have seen some of the flaws, and we would have been able to, the Democrats would have been able to react quicker to get a new candidate instead of waiting until June 27th, that debate last year, to talk about replacing him and then give Kamala Harris 100 days to run a presidential campaign. So I believe that competition is good. It's going to bring the best out of our candidates. And I think with the number, I am running in a district that's just it's borders DC. It has 76,000 federal employees. And so this is a huge issue to us, but also affordability for everyone. People who are getting college degrees. I had my student loans forgiven a couple of years ago through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, and also with paid parental leave, which I know is a big issue for you. I have a 1-year-old and a 7-year-old. When my 7-year-old was born, my wife didn't have any paid leave, so I had to donate some of my hours. I didn't get to really take off any time when my oldest was born, and then for the second kid, women and fathers, they get 480 hours from the government. That's not enough. You can't dump your kid off to daycare when they're 3 months old, and so we need to do better. And the fact that we're giving billions of dollars away to special interest groups who have membership at Mar-a-Lago, we have the money. We could do that. We could do universal health care. And so we just need people who are fighting. And my government experience, I know, just like the opposite, if Russ Vought is the Wicked Witch of the East, I'm the good witch who knows how the government works and can put, not things back together as they were, but in a better way, in a more, responsive to the needs of 2025 and beyond.
One last question about the layoffs that Doge did as it related to you. So what was your experience with Democrats at the time? So you get fired along with 1,300 people. These are people that definitely should not have been fired. Again, it's definitely not about cost cutting because they said we were going to, for example, cut the Pentagon, and then they added $150 billion to the Pentagon, which wiped out all their savings. They couldn't find $35 billion in oil subsidies. Come on, had nothing to do with cost cutting, right? So you go to the Democrats, you go, okay, fight back. And what was I can see it from the outside, but I can't see it from the inside. From the inside, when you're that deeply affected by it, how much do you think the Democrats helped you in your fight back? And how much didn't they? And what was your sense of, whether it's psyched or disappointed at what happened?
I'll name the people who are stepping up. I'm part of a group of fired federal employees. We go to the Hill every Tuesday to lobby members of Congress. Elizabeth Warren and Chris Van Hollen have met with us a lot. And then the other people haven't. And when I reached out to my delegation to state, my case when I was informed that I was being riffed, I got the chain letter response that their hands are tied, and it's like what Chris Van Hollen did for Abrego Garcia going down to El Salvador. It didn't free him, but it sent a message that he was fighting, and that's the fighting spirit is so important. And there are older members of Congress, old school Democrats, if you will, that say, well, it's our experience and we know how the government operates. The people who are really holding Republicans' feet to the fire are the younger members of the delegation, the Jasmine Crockett's, the Robert Garcias of the world. And so I want to be one of those people who's fighting back. My website, stuffinforva.com, and I want to be part of the change. I know how the government works or doesn't work, and I want to look Marco Rubio in the eyes and ask him why he fired us. And I want to be a sounding board for federal employees, because the guy I'm running against hasn't had in-person town halls, and it was just unresponsive. And if you were born into wealth, you don't have to work hard for your money. If you and I don't work hard for our money, we don't get paid. So we have to do what we can to make ends meet. But this is also for me about, like I said before, it's my neighbors are potentially losing their homes. People have lost their health care, and this is a major issue. This is an economic time bomb that has gone off in Northern Virginia and the DC area. And certain representatives understand that, and they're prioritizing this. They sense the urgency, but others don't. And that's why if you have to be the change that you want to see at the ballot box, if you go to vote and you think, oh, I don't like this guy or this person, well, run. And that's what I'm doing. I'm swimming upstream, competing against a guy who's comfortable accepting corporate money. And, that's why it's important to establish a grassroots base and to, I'm advocating for federal employees. And this is something that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, so duffinforva.com, and we'll put the link in the description box. And so no corporate PAC money for you?
No corporate PAC money, and I'm using when I say the Trump playbook in a good way. I'm telling the media my story, and that's spreading the word, and that levels the playing field. And I really appreciate you being able to allowing me to share my story with your viewers.
All right, and no foreign government money, AIPAC, Israeli lobby, or any other lobby.
No, and that's the benefit of former federal employees running for office. We've already gone through. I have the security clearance. I know that I'm not. When we travel overseas, we're not allowed to accept a gift more than $20. Not $2 billion in our startup fund like Jared Kushner. And we know how to work with, just like you with the example, talking to the late Charlie Kirk and Tucker Carlson and other people. We need to have dialogue with people we disagree with, because they may help us pass legislation that will help us get either banning corporate purchasing of housing, or the other things are our priorities.
All right, sounds good. And I like the story of Elizabeth Warren and Chris Van Hollen helping behind the scenes. Chris Van Hollen's not getting enough credit. That brother's been working super hard, and he's kind of almost embarrassing the rest of the Senate. He seems to be doing more than the rest of them combined. So I appreciate you telling that story. I appreciate you getting involved and trying to fight back. Oh, actually, last thing. You're running for Congress, Virginia's 8th congressional district. Everybody check out Michael Duffin there. So Michael, if there was one thing you could do to fix the government, you're not just a member of Congress, you get special powers. You could fix this. What would it be?
Off the top of my head, term limits. If you can't impact change in Congress, for me, it's 12 years in the House and then 12 years in the Senate. We need a deeper bench with Democrats. And I come from Chicago, where Barack Obama, his first race for Congress, he lost by 30 points to an entrenched incumbent. Obama had good ideas. He didn't run a perfect campaign, but my point is that when you have people who are retiring or dying in office up on Capitol Hill, and I've seen this in person when we're going to lobby, and people who are barely coherent are representatives. It's like you need to make way for new voices. And in my case, I'm not asking him to politely step aside. I'm going to take his position, and that's why I'm talking to you, and I'm talking to any other media podcast that'll have me to spread this message about the importance of fighting for federal employees.
Well, I like that attitude. All right, Duffin4va.com. Thank you, brother. We appreciate it.
Thank you,
Michael
sir.
Duffin, everybody. All right, so now I do a bonus episode for you guys. If you remember, hit that beautiful join button below. I had a good story that I wanted to tell you guys earlier. I'm gonna have to remember it. And then if you're anywhere else, tyt.com/join. And I'll tell you a fun little personal story. We're having fun with it these days, so check it out. Members, I'll see you in a minute.